In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Sorry, guys, for the technical difficulties. We were trying to get the stream set up so we could react to it. Today, I'm joined with my dear brothers, iKan and Kairos. Kairos has his own channel. It's Alexandrian Theology. I'm gonna link that in the description and in the comments. Please check him out. He has really nice content. For those who saw the title, today we're going to be responding to Jay Dyer, David Erhan, and Kai. They recently did their part 4 of the Refuting Oriental Orthodoxy streams. They did 3 before this, and we responded to those 3. I think the last one we responded within like, I want to say 24 hours. And this one we're responding in like less than like 7 hours. I think 7 hours when they started streaming. It's been like 5 hours since they finished, something like that. I don't know. You guys know how I always want to get these things done with and out of the way. There's nothing really to prepare for in these types of discussions. It's just pretty easy. We could do it off the dome, especially with my really highly educated and intelligent brothers with me today. iKan, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm iKan. I'm back again. You guys remember me from the last couple streams, the parts 1, 2, and 3. And so I'm joining Agen again for part 4.
And Kairos.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kairos. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Agen, for having me, and iKan as well. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna put up the stream right now. Let me see. Okay, we're gonna put it on like I think 1.6 speed so we could get this over with. I didn't prepare any slides because they didn't prepare any slides. I could have been, could have made my own slides and just overpowered them with utilizing quotes, which I've been doing for the past 3 streams. But because this one was more heavy metaphysics, I thought it would be better if this was kind of just off the rip, raw reaction. So let's start that.
They're a lot cooler than me now. They don't like me anymore. I'm washed up, some might say. But I've talked them into coming back. I sent them all 55 Bitcoin each, and they decided that they're willing to talk to me again. They're going to help me revive my career on the internet. I have David Erhan, the one, the only David Erhan, king of refuting the Gephizites, and I have with me Kai of Orthodox Shahada, our beloved brothers Kai and David. And today we're going to do part 4, where we get into some of the confusion around a couple key terms, such as inhypostatized, inhypostatization, composite hypostasis, and some other things. Guys, how are y'all today?
I was doing very well until you started speaking. So thank you for that moment of silence for a little while. Jokes aside, it's good to be back. I had a long hiatus, just long hiatus. And just recently I decided to come back and to make videos again. I guess a lot of like monophysite stuff happened in a row. Like we continue doing the stream right now. I made a video quite recently on how scripture teaches 2 natures in Christ. So I would definitely check that out.
I'm thinking of responding to this video, but it might be in a bit because, as you guys know, I've been working on that project, the papacy video. So I want to make sure I get that out of the way before I keep posting other stuff. But I probably will respond to that. You can keep playing.
It's only 20 minutes. There's a lot of, I will say, new evidence, so to speak, a new way of looking at the patristic writings, because we looked at Philippians 2, 5-7 in particular. And once you kind of understand the argument, I will say it's very, very airtight. That St. Paul teaches.
Pause right here. This is, I really like David Erhan for his Freudian slips. He keeps saying things that shouldn't be said. Like, for example, we found new evidence 2,000 years after Christ. We found new evidence by looking at a way in which you can interpret this 2,000-year-old Bible verse. That isn't how theology should be run. It shouldn't be, we just found something new. It should be presenting what's always been the faith handed down from the beginning. So this type of rhetoric, we made a new argument, right? We found some new evidence. That isn't how it should be. You should present your case. If the Bible really did teach Diophysitism as you made it out to be, how is this new? This should have been the standard patristic exegesis in literally everyone ever. You can continue.
The Council of Chalcedon really only repeats actually what St. Paul is teaching, and there's patristic basis for that. So yeah, I had a decent stream with Cleve's Antiquity as well. So yeah, it's, as I said, good to be back. I'll have a video. I have 2 videos that's available in early access on Patreon. It will be uploaded sometime soon. One of them is also on similar to this topic. It's on conceptual distinction in Christology, which is also very relevant. I will highly recommend all of you to get ready for that. Basically, it'll also be like 15-20 minutes, but I think it really gets to the heart of conceptual distinction. Which, spoiler alert, it's basically distinction without division. That's basically actually what it is, in essence.
Same stuff going on with in the Trinity as well. When we make these types of distinctions, Christology and Trinity reflects back and forth, and that's also going to be a key point in refuting the monophysite errors, is the lack of reflexibility between Trinity and Christology. But I will, by the way, have linked below David's more recent video that he did. It was really good. And go ahead, David.
yeah, that's just all of the news that I had to declare essentially.
So pause right here.
Hi, what's up?
In the past streams, they've been trying to make this argument. They've been doing this argument that you should have reflexivity between your Christology and your Tridology. For instance, in the Trinity, you have three persons, one nature, like the divine nature between them. In Christology, you have one person with two natures. In the Trinity, the energy and the will is natural. In Christology, the energy and the will are natural. So because there's two natures, there's two wills and energies. Jay Dyer will say in many places, you can't have energy and will as personal, right? Otherwise, you'd have three energies in the Trinity. So you can't argue Christ has one energy just because he's one person. Otherwise, you'd make three energies and three wills in the Trinity. Now, Kairos and brothers, I can obviously get into the nuance of why this is a really bad argument. But Kairos is working on a project right now. I won't share too much, but what's something you notice about how will is used in the fathers? Like, do all humans have one energy and one will? What do you think about that, Kairos?
Yeah, I mean, will in the fathers, the way that they set it up is that with humans, will is proper to the active being, just like how in God, the will and energy is proper to active being. It's not proper to what you would say is the common essence, proper to the individual. So for you to say that in the Trinity, will is proper to nature, well, the fathers are picking out active being. To say in Christology, will is proper to nature, we're picking out the active being. We're not picking out the two particular realities.
Right. So Cyril, I show this quote many times in his dialogues in the Trinity, if I remember correctly. He says the will resides in the subject. So the fathers make the point, for example, St. Gregory of Nyssa and Ad Ablabium, the work Not Three Gods, you can find it on New Advent. He makes the argument that there's one God precisely because God has numerically one energy. And this is not the case in men. Men have many diverse activities. So if you're going to argue that energy is merely essential, will is merely essential, you're going to enter either tritheism, if you make that identical with the way it works in creation, or you're going to argue some sort of mono-humanity. We're all one man in reality, right? We're not really one God. The way that God is one is the same way all of man is one. If you're going to say that they have this numerically one energy, numerically one will. So we find actually in the fathers, especially in the ascetic fathers, they make the point God has one will, we have many wills. They make the point that will belongs to an agent. In God, the one agent is the divine essence, right? Essence is not really distinct from existence. That's impossible. There's no type of particular universal instantiation in God. You don't have that rigid type token distinction as you do in creation. So in God, the divine essence is that one mover, right? There's the one God who created everything. It's the Father through the Son and the Spirit. Whereas in creation, will and energy resides in the subject, right? The agent in creation is what is instantiated, and his essence is what's abstract. Whereas God's essence isn't merely an abstract that's moderately real in particulars. That's not how it works. So you need to draw that sharp distinction between God and creation. There are things which are reflexive. No one denies that. But to argue total reflexivity is to either argue tritheism, the way we are all many men and we have one energy and one will, or it's to argue all of humanity have that same type of unity that exists in God, which is ridiculous to say. So I've responded to this argument in the past 3 streams over and over, and they just repeat it as if I've never said anything. I mean, at this point, I don't think I'm talking to them. At this point, I'm talking to the audience. If you want to respond to me, please respond to me. You can continue, unless you have something to add, guys.
I'll catch us up on you as well.
Hey, Jay, how's it going? David, nice to see you guys. We haven't done this for a while. People were saying, when are you guys going to keep doing the streams? And then the monophysites, they're like, oh, look, they're not providing responses.
Oh, they thought they had
all
us.
this stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we've got them. They got no way to respond. No, we just have lives. We just have lives. Just to share a little bit there with the audience. So God willing, in February, we'll be welcoming our first child. So
Awesome.
that and just everything around that and how life is pretty much centered on getting that stuff get going. Now, maybe I can just maybe bring to everybody's attention, because David's not really hiding it, but I think congrats are in order, David.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Congrats for what exactly? That is going to be in the next. That's going to be the next. Yeah.
Well, you've shown your hand on screen several times, so those astute watchers have been paying attention.
This one.
Yeah.
I'm happy for these bros too, because like, you know, when Discord first kind of got kicking off in 2017, 18,
Skip a little bit. They're just
these bros.
talking.
Or anything like that. It's
Meet Gym Monster 2, your all-in-one smart home gym. Set it up anywhere, no limits.
And when there's an ad, just mute it. So like we don't. I don't know if that does anything to
we're
the
going to talk
stream.
about a couple of the hot button terms and topics around that. David's going to I got about a 15-minute section where he's going to talk. Obviously, Kai can talk as long as he wants as well about whatever he wants. I'll kick it off with a great quote by St. Maximus. Christ is not by hypostasis mortal and immortal, nor is he powerless and omnipotent, visible and invisible, created and uncreated, but he is the former by nature and the latter by hypostasis. And this
Pause right here.
For
So this is a quote that's been used on Twitter for like 5 years now. It's from Maximus, the confessor, the so-called confessors, Apoculum 24. This is used by people who agree with Dyer's position that like there's a divine only person. He's only a composite person in a certain sense, insofar as he has the two natures. But in actuality, the person didn't suffer composition and lose his simplicity. So they use this quotation from Maximus, Apoculum 24. Apoculum 24, if you read it in context, the point he's trying to make is that the human will in Christ is not naturally omnipotent, but it becomes omnipotent when examined in the person. So Maximus is denying P and not P properties in the hypostases, like in simplicity. He wants to argue that whenever the humanity opposes God the Word, it doesn't oppose it when it's being deified. It opposes it when you view it in its own natural integrity. So iKan, if you can kind of explain that, what exactly Apoculum 24 says, what their actual historical position is on whether Christ is divine only or whether he's a composite person, etc.
Yeah, for sure. So, as you said, the whole Apoculum is actually focusing on the passage about not as I will, but as you will. And so Maximus's whole argument is that this is the natural will, which basically he's arguing that there is in Christ the natural properties, and then there's that what makes him hypostatically one. And so in the hypostases, there's a deification. They talk about this later, but a big point of the union is deification. And Kai even makes the argument that precisely because they affirm deification, that is how they prove they're not Nestorian. He makes this later down the line, and we'll see it.
Yeah. So if you check the seventh council of the Chalcedonians, Nicaea 2, there's a synodicon in that seventh council, which verbatim says eternal memory to the one who says there is one hypostasis and predicates to it the created and the uncreated, the et cetera, opposing contradictory properties. So you citing this quote from Maximus, let's grant your reading. All that would be doing is contradicting your actual ecclesially bounded documents. That's all it would be doing. If you were going to take that reading of Maximus, right, that it isn't actually the person who has opposing properties. The person has some properties qua the person and other properties qua human nature. If we're going to take that blank reading, you're just contradicting your church's official position. I recommend you read that Synodicon.
And it makes an even bigger problem because Maximus is comparing, for example, the natural human properties versus the deified properties. And his argument is that if we go by Dyer's reading of this passage, which is that the immortal, the uncreated, etc., the omnipotent, these are just the properties of the hypostases and not the properties of the nature, that would lead into a major issue in the Holy Trinity. That would lead into 3 divinities, 3 uncreateds, 3 immortalities, 3 omnipotence, which would also eventually lead into 3 gods.
Exactly. So those properties are essential properties. So it's not reducible to the hypostases. The divine hypostases, Maximus believes, is uncreated, et cetera, et cetera. Those are essential properties. And at the end of Apoculum 24, the very end, he says that he possesses all of the natural properties of divinity and humanity. So this reading is really bad of a reading. This isn't your position. Stop trying to pretend that it is. Once again, let's be charitable. Let's say Maximus is like the only guy who agrees with them on this point, right? There's a sense in which the hypostasis is divine only, and then a sense in which it's composite and has the properties of both natures. Let's take that reading charitably. If we are to do that, hypothetically speaking, if we were to assume that Maximus's position is actually what you're saying, that doesn't solve the metaphysical critique I've raised, especially to Jay Dyer's face. I went on his stream and made this argument. The human properties of Christ, this set of human properties, when you predicate them to God the Word, is it proximately or by proxy? In other words, does he have those properties intrinsically or extrinsically? If it's intrinsically, then your God gained he gained properties which he didn't have before intrinsically. Like your actual God He didn't have these properties. Now he has the properties of mutability. You're going to predicate that to God the Word intrinsically. If it's extrinsic, you have dual subjects of predication. So now when you have individual human properties, that wouldn't be ascribed to the Logos as hypostases. It would be ascribed to another thing. For example, being son of Mary. Is that intrinsic to God the Word, or is it extrinsic to God the Word? If it's intrinsic to God the Word, your God became a new son. He gained a new relation of filiation to the Virgin Mary, which intrinsically changes him. If it's extrinsic, then there lies another thing that is distinct from God the Word, which is the Son of Mary. So now you have Son of God as an intrinsic property of the divine hypostases, and then Son of Mary, which is extrinsically related to the divine hypostases, but intrinsically belongs to another. You would have two sons. So you didn't deal with the metaphysical critique. This is like the bare minimum, right? Bare minimum is that you would have, oh, my fathers teach what I'm saying, right? Which Maximus isn't. But if I grant that, you just reach the bare minimum. Now deal with the metaphysical critique. Are the human properties intrinsic or extrinsic? When I debated Dyer, he said they're not extrinsic. Thank you. Cool. Then I asked, are they intrinsic? And he realized immediately, oh, I can't say that. How could it be intrinsic, right? Nothing can be intrinsic to the Godhead, like being a creature, being mutable, etc. And that's why ever since then, he's been panicking, doesn't want to talk to me. This is exactly this reason. It's not because I'm any magnificent debater. I don't think I am. I think I'm not able to present myself well, many flaws I have. But the very fact that he's acting like this proves how devastating this is to his argument. The Chalcedonians have been having this infighting on social media, whether Christ is divine only person, whether he can be called a human person. And this is a fundamental issue when you adopt that Neo-Chalcedonian metaphysical framework. Let's continue with that.
Kind of laying out the distinction, not just between nature and person, but also the fact that we can continue to have a Diophysite and a Diothelite discussion of Christ even after the incarnation and resurrection, etc., without that distinction causing division, separation, or some weird Nestorian end result. So, do you want to go first, David, or do you want to?
Yeah.
Kai, do you want to kick it off?
Yes. First of all, look, that quote is incredibly important. I mean, it's from the 24th Opusculum of Saint Maximus the Confessor, and I want to kind of kick it off with both as an introduction, particularly symmetrical and asymmetrical Christology. If you don't know what these mean exactly, I'll explain them, so it's not an issue. And particularly its themes in the writings of the fathers, and especially of Saint Cyril of Alexandria. And I'll start with kind of like the asymmetrical Christology, which is what we see with Saint Athanasius, especially in his On the Incarnation, and Saint Cyril of Alexandria. To give an example,
can you pause, Kairos, because it's like lagging a bit? Try and let it catch up. All right, continue.
Logical paradigm in explaining the union between divinity and humanity is what's in the literature referred to as the Logos-Sarx model, or in English just the word-flesh model. And you will notice in those two words, you have the word, which refers to the subject, and then you have flesh, which does not refer to any subject. It refers to kind of an impersonal human nature. And especially if you look at the writings of both of these saints that I mentioned in the general Christological themes, they will oftentimes speak of the flesh being the instrument of the word, as the word is acting in the world. Like all of his divine activities are done through the flesh as an instrument. So that's something that St. Cyril particularly says quite often. So that's asymmetrical Christology. It's the relationship between the hypostasis, the person, right, that is united to an impersonal nature. In this specific case, the Word of God, who is united to an impersonal human nature. So this is the fundamental basis for what we will say the divine hypostasis.
Right here.
After the...
So iKan, can you explain the Oriental Orthodox position on this vertical-horizontal distinction when we view the two natures of Christ?
Right. I love that David Erhan seems to be at least a little bit well read on this topic, because he basically does concede my understanding of their view, which is that they do affirm a horizontal and vertical model of the incarnation, but in two different respects. And so to clarify for the people who don't really follow on this, the vertical and horizontal models of the incarnation, it basically refers to the different schools or opinions on how the incarnation came about. So, for example, to demonstrate the vertical, he's talking about asymmetrical. It's like up and down, up going down. So this refers to God becoming man. And so, for example, we characterize the Apollinarians and the Eutychians as people who affirmed a purely and solely vertical model of the incarnation. They purely believed that God became man without any equality of the natures. And so when they did that, for example, the Apollinarians, they had to take out the human soul to make room for the divinity. And then for the Eutychians, they just basically abolished the humanity or mingled it together. And so this is what the vertical would lead to. And then the symmetrical or the horizontal model is of the natures coming together at the same time. The natures coming together at the same time, having this alone would lead to Nestorianism. For Nestorius' view, it wasn't God who became man, it was God and the man meeting in the middle. And so that's what a purely horizontal model leads to. Now, what the Chalcedonians have done is obviously at Chalcedon, we'd argue, and we have proven this, that Chalcedon was Nestorian. It followed the teachings of Nestorius.
Explicitly.
Right. And so by doing this, Chalcedon adopted a horizontal purely model. But then Constantinople too comes along. They realize that's bad for them. They realize how it looks. They change things up, and they adopt a vertical model, a purely vertical model, which is what became called the hypostases. It is the divinity coming down and remaining the divine hypostases with the human nature basically inserted into it. That's what hypostases means. It means that now the human nature is hypostasized, which means in hypostases of that divine hypostasis. And so that's where we would argue there's a change. And so then Constantinople III comes along, the council where they talked about the wills and energies. Obviously, they never addressed the natures. They never, by dealing with the hypostasis problem, they didn't really solve the nature problem. So the natures stay on a purely horizontal plane, and then the wills are united on a purely horizontal plane, and the energies are united on a purely horizontal plane, whereas the hypostasis alone becomes vertical. So the hypostasis is the only thing that is God becoming man. The nature, the will, the energies are like two things that meet in the middle, but they just remain two. There's no real unity. There's no real entelechy. And so where we differ here is that our model is what I like to call, at least, this hasn't been coined, but I like to call it the cross model, because we don't have the horizontal model of the incarnation on one side for some categories and then the vertical model for other things. We believe that it is like a cross. The coming down of God is happening at the same time that divinity and humanity are meeting in a symmetrical way. And so what that leads to is that they don't remain two, but they become one, because it is God who became man. But that still allows for the distinction, and it allows for example, we don't have the problem of hypostases. We believe two hypostases were united, and not just the divinity coming down without any relation from the humanity. And so this is where we differ. The hypostases, nature, will, energy, are both God becoming man as well as divinity and humanity uniting, and so they become one composite.
Right. So once again, for those who kind of didn't get that understanding of vertical versus horizontal, mere horizontal union would be like God the Word, the man, and they meet at the middle, right? Horizontal. Vertical would be you have God and the flesh, right? Eutychus would have affirmed that type of union so that the flesh is subsumed in that which is higher. This is the purely dominant.
And
so you need a model. You need a model which is kind of like a cross.
I'll let you continue, but to add on to for clarification on the vertical, is that the vertical always requires that the humanity is in some way not fully equal in the way that is united. And so that's why to have humanity alone without to have the vertical alone without the horizontal balancing it out, this is what leads to all the heretics denying some part of the humanity. So for the Eutychians, they denied the fullness of the nature of the humanity, or they denied that it continues to exist. For the Apollinarians, they denied the soul. And now for the Chalcedonians, they denied the hypostatic reality of the humanity. Go ahead.
Right. Now let's continue. Let's unpause. I think
Incarnation specifies that it's the Word of God, right? So there's the same Word of God who prior to the incarnation, the Word was created through him. He descended and spoke to Abraham in Genesis 18 and 19. It is he that judged Sodom and Gomorrah, for example. It's that Word of God who also walked in the garden prior to the fall. And the one, like Abraham saw his day and he was glad, right? Christ says it's this one and the same person, right? So that's kind of the basis of it. And then there's the symmetrical feature, which is talking about the kind of union of the two natures and in some way resulting in a composition. This is what we will call composite hypostasis, right? The two natures form a composite hypostasis in the sense that they are, you could say, like parts of a whole, right? The person of Christ being fully divine and fully man is composite by hypostasis.
Pause right here. He's right. It is a part to whole model. Damascene says it in his Against the Jacobites, chapter 71. But here's the issue. Let's use that part whole kind of language. The Synod of Antioch in the year 268, from the fragments we have, it says that the word and the flesh are like a part to the whole individual. So it believes that there's the word, the body from Mary, the two make one whole individual. So they'll say this one individual resulting is like a whole, and then the flesh and God, the word himself, are like parts. For the Neo-Chalcedonians, rather than the word being a part to a whole, analogically speaking, the way it was taught at the Synod of Antioch, Council of Ephesus, now the Neo-Chalcedonians make the word a whole with parts. And that's why we argue immutability goes bye-bye. You can't say your God is immutable anymore if he's now constituted. If now he has a material constitution intrinsically, which he did not have before, then you can't say it's an immutable hypostasis. It's simply not the case. So yeah, let's continue with that.
Saint Justinian, Saint John of Damascus, various different saints, various different fathers use this terminology, particularly to oppose composite nature. So they will argue that Christ is not a composite nature, this form of divinity, humanity, but rather he is a composite hypostasis, to make the case that he's not kind of like a third nature or kind of like a new, again, forming nature, but the person that unites divinity and humanity in his own person. And especially in the writings of St. Peter, you see this particularly with his mere physics, from the nature, the one incarnate nature, the one nature that is incarnate, right? And that qualification is very important. And he himself says it's important because if he didn't make that qualification, St. Peter says, then our critiques, then the criticism against us will be correct, because it will go against kind of like the human nature aspect of Christ. And it's stating that the two natures are indivisible, they're not divided from each other. And that's a different subject, but I want to kind of continue on.
Pause right here. So, it sounds like he made a slight blunder, which he shouldn't have made. He's I don't know if I heard this right, brothers. You can correct me. Did he just say that the Mia Feces formula is a reference to indivisibility in Christ? Did I hear that right? He argued that there's one nature of the word, and if you don't add the qualification incarnate, I know what Cody's talking about. He's talking about letter 46. If you don't add the qualification incarnate, you lose that human aspect in the incarnation. He's right. Cyril does say that the one nature of the word isn't merely one nature of the word. It's one nature of the word incarnate. It's divine human. But he made a blunder here. He's now saying that this Mia Feces is the signification of the indivisibility itself. So now it's a single subject of predication. That would go against what Damascene says in On the Orthodox Faith, Book 3. Damascene argues that this passage of Cyril is referring to the duality itself, that one nature of the word means divine essence, incarnate means a second nature that Cyril forgot to call a nature. So if now you're arguing Mia Feces refers to the indivisibility, rather than saying Mia Feces is just a fancy way to say two natures, you're going against your fathers, like explicitly. If that one nature is actually referring to a thing which is one from out of two, you're disagreeing with how your own saint read the same passage you just cited right now, 5 seconds ago. You can continue.
The main question that you can typically get, and before I get that, some other quotes I'd also like to support is like St. Demetrius Danilo says the hypostasis of the word of God was not united with another human hypostasis, but through the incarnation of himself a human.
You know what else he says? He says your God became a human hypostasis. He says that verbatim. He says the divine person, he left as divine only, and then he returned not only as a divine person, but as a human person. Verbatim. I think this was in my stream number 2, where I showed the quote. Verbatim.
Actually, yeah, and on top of that, somebody actually just put in, well, not just, but they put in the chat earlier a quote as well from, this means that he is a person. He, as a person, is the Word as divine hypostasis, who also became human hypostases. This is from Stanole in the Orthodox Dogmatic Theology, Volume 3, page 98.
Yeah, that is not a blunder you should make. Don't cite people to make your case for something that totally opposes what you're trying to do on this stream. Let's continue.
Human nature that he assumed and included in his eternal hypostasis, right? That he included it in his person. I believe this is from his Experience of God, volume 3.
Right here. Didn't, when I debated Jay Dyer, he said en hypostasis does not mean in the person? And I told him that's literally what it means. En means in, hypostasis means hypostasis. And hypostasis means in the hypostasis. Here's your own buddy admitting it. Continue.
Father George Florowski says there's no human hypostasis in Christ. I don't recall the exact quote. But an important question that people kind of have in regards to this, okay, on one hand it's composite, on one hand it's divine. How does that make any sense, right? How is that supposed to make any sense? And I would like to invite people to kind of consider the two different aspects in the sense. So starting with composite hypostasis, when we're speaking about the natures composing the person, it's not as if the person is a result right? Like coming out as a result of the union completely, because then you will kind of have actually an historian Christ that with a composite hypostasis composed of two hypostases, and these two hypostases also being in some kind of like a purely external union, as if they're two subjects united by grace, like the prophet and the Holy Spirit, for example. But rather you can think of them as like material parts. When I say material parts, I don't mean like they're physical, but rather they're the whatness, right? The answer, what is that particular, for example, subject or that particular thing? He's the God-man, right? He's divine human, he's fully God, he's fully man. And in terms of this kind of question, the divine hypostasis in this sense, and I'll use like kind of Aristotelian terminology because it is useful in the sense and it kind of gets into the distinction. The big question is, okay, there are the two natures are united, but over time, like how do we make sure that this thing stays identical over time, right? Like identity over time. This is the case for even human persons, but it's also important in the case of the composition. And the word hypokimenon could be used here, which is translated as material substrate. Again, it might give you different and wrong ideas because it's typically used for like essences, like human nature, divine nature, things like that. But hypokimenon, very simply, is kind of this, it's the substance that persists in a thing through change and its basic essence. And it's not something like, even when we talk about human beings, right, created beings, which change, the hypokimenon will be the substrate of that thing that doesn't change, right? It will be like for rational beings, it will be their identity.
Pause right here.
And so,
Pause right here. Go ahead, iKan.
This is insane. He just so his response to that in hypostasis argument leading to change is that even for humans and created things, their hypostasis does not change.
So he's applying and Kairos, I want you to hop in on this. He's applying the same solution for identity over time, right? You're going to pick a specific sortal and that's going to persist over time. And then anything that happens to the hypostases in other categories, you're not going to mark that persistence, right? If that kind of makes sense. There's a certain identity which goes through different stages at different time. And for David Erhan, this would be divine only, right? The divine only identity, that formal identity of God, the word never changes. It goes through time. But other aspects like his material constitution changes, from what I'm assuming. That the divine only formal aspect doesn't change, but the material constitution, the material whatness, like you said, that gets added to the divine logos. So this is a really big deal. For a second, let's take a second. What is the Diophysite counting method? Why do they come out with two natures? If my brothers can answer, any one of you guys.
Yeah, they count by identity.
Count by identity, right? If there's any two predicates that are in any way opposing or in any way discernible. So this is not even like standard counting by identity. This is like that, but like with an extra presupposition that even if one subject of predication has opposing properties, those discernible properties collapse into their own divergent things, right? The divine essence and the human essence. That's going to be the ground for why that one person has both of those opposing predicates. If that's how you're going to count, I'm going to ask you a very simple question, Erhan, if you're watching this, and I want you to think really deep about this. This divine only formal identity, right? The formal divine only hypostases versus the material composite hypostases, which is divine human. Are they discernible? Yes. If they're discernible by the same counting method, how many hypostases do you have? If the divine only hypostases is distinct from the divine human hypostases, insofar as one is in reference to its material constitution, the other one is in reference to its identity over time. If I can find a distinction between those two things, by your own counting method, that would be two different things, two different hypostases. Simple. If the divine only, once again, if the divine only hypostases, when reviewing it as identity over time, right, is distinct from the divine human hypostases when reviewing its material constitution, because those two things are distinct, discernible, they have a non-identity, by your own counting method, you have to count them as two different objects. You have two hypostases now. You have one which doesn't host the human predicates, the divine only aspect, but then you also have one which hosts the human predicates. Its whatness, its material constitution, like he said, that's his words. Its material constitution is divine human. Let's continue.
It is in that sense we speak of the hypostasis of Christ, because it's the same word of God, it's the same person. This is the reason why we refer to the Virgin Mary as the mother of God, but not the mother of man, or not even the mother of Christ. That should be an important question. It's not just that the person that's born is divine by nature, but the person that's born is a divine person, right? The reason why, for example, anthropotokos, it's heretical. It's because it will suggest a distinct human person in Christ. And even Christotokos is rejected by Saint Cyril because, first of all, it's too vague. And second of all, it again does not consider the person, the identity, the subject, but rather the result of the union of the two natures, which will be the name of the union of the two prosopes, as we see in the union of the two persons. Whereas hypostasis, properly speaking, is the separate existence. And how is the separate existence of Christ characterized, right? By being begotten of the Father. That's why we call him divine hypostasis, because his separate existence, his unique mode of being, is that he's begotten of the Father, which is
pause right here.
And even say,
is that hypostasis also signified and marked as being born in Bethlehem from the Virgin? Yes or no? It's a simple question. Does it have that predicate or does it not? You're going to say it does. Everyone has to agree, right? The divine word was born in Bethlehem. But how are you going to predicate that? How are you going to allocate that? Is it going to be intrinsically or extrinsically? Obviously, you're not going to apply it to the formal sense of God the Word. You're going to apply it to the material sense. But once again, by your own counting method, those would be two different hypostases. If your method of counting is any differing in any non-identity in predicates leads to two different objects, I can find discernibility here. I can find properties being negated in the divine only formal hypostasis sense that are affirmed in the composite materially constituted sense. If I can do that, I can count two. That's the diophysite counting system, counting by distinction. Let's continue.
Paul speaks about, I think in Romans 1:3 and 1:4, he talks about kind of the power of God announcing like his divinity in that sense. Yes, another quote that I want to say before I finalize this. This is from St. John of Damascus against the Jacobites. This is quoted by Johannes Zakuber's book, The Rise of Christian Theology and the End of Ancient
You read my mind
Physics.
because I was about to quote it.
Yes, yeah, it's page 297. St. John says, he basically says there's a distinction between the hypostasis and what exists in a hypostasis. So this is the sense, like the hypostasis, the hypokemon, right? Like the fundamental thing that doesn't change, whereas even things like essence, the properties, energies, they're all enhypostatized. So there's hypostasis, and there are things that are enhypostatized in a hypostasis. And these things are, as I said, essence, will, energy, natural properties, so on and so forth. And so this is very fundamental, because when we speak about the person of Christ, the hypostasis of Christ, both compound and simple in what senses, is that the person aspect of the hypostasis is none other than the Word of God. It's none other than him. It's the personal level. And the composite aspect is, again, the material, the whatness.
See, pause right there. You did it again. There's a simple aspect. There's a composite aspect. The composite aspect refers to material constitution. The simple aspect is going to refer to that formal identity over time. Do you not see what you're doing? You're invoking two different hypostases, my brother, my friend. Pay attention to your words. By your own counting system, that is two different things. Those aren't the same thing. Do you not get how that follows? If you have the divine only distinguished from another sense where it's divine human, obviously you're going to say, oh, either way, it's one hypostasis, right? We're just looking at two aspects of it. I can affirm a P and not P in both of those senses. So they can become two different objects. Continue.
Very critically, they are made one. Made one in what sense? They're made one in the unique mode of existence. That's why Christ is the theanthropic hypostasis, right? It reflects the unique mode in which he exists. For example, St. Dionysius the Areopagite in his fourth letter speaks about the new divine human theandric energy. It's not to say that there's a tertium quid energy, but rather that divinity and humanity both in Christ are acting in a unique mode. And for example, Christ walking on water. Christ's human nature is elevated by the divinity that it is united to, in which he's now able to do a human act that will be impossible on its own, but with the cooperation of the divine nature, which actually Pope St. Leo says this. The form.
Pause right there. Remember, he says it would have been impossible on its own. In approximately 40 minutes, he's going to regret ever saying that. In approximately 40 minutes. Remember that. Keep that back of your mind as you're listening. That it could not have been done if it was a mere humanity on its own. It requires a divinity for that task. Good. Remember that. Let's continue.
For Christ to do that activity, right? It's a human activity done in the divine mode. And this unique mode, this theanthropic mode is one. That's what the two natures becoming one fundamentally means. They become one in the hypostasis of Christ. And this is particularly specified by the church fathers after the 5th and 6th century. So that's basically kind of like
and pause right here. Notice you never appealed to the ones before the 5th and 6th century. Wouldn't that be more important to show me how your model is patristic? Or why are you going to appeal to people post-schism? It's almost like we've been saying, Neo-Chalcedonianism was invented in the 5th and 6th centuries, the beginning of the 6th century. Is that not our argument? Why are you giving us more wood for the fire? Where is this idea? Where is this idea of enhypostatization? The way, and I'm going to be specific, the way it's articulated by Maximus, Damascene, and Justinian. Where is that before the schism? Why did everyone forget to bring it up? Continue.
Positive hypostasis in Christ and like the relevant portion. Again, the Theotokos part, I think, absolutely demonstrates the point that I'm making. Because again, if it was just about the nature of the subject, I guess she's the mother of the man too. But no, that's a
Exactly.
title that's
Yeah,
rejected.
if it was just about the nature, it would be fine to say Christotokos or something like that.
Yeah, Christotokos, because it includes both of the natures, right? Like Nestor says, hey, it includes both natures. It's a name that includes both natures, so why not use it? Ezekiel said that doesn't hit on the identity of Christ, which is what?
Pause right here. Pause right here. This has to be brought up. They can easily make the same argument against us, the one I made, right? Because in our view, we can still conceive of like the word before his incarnation, right? It was a simple divine only hypostasis. But then in the incarnation, we now believe the two hypostases, the word and the flesh, make one. So there's a composite divine human hypostasis, but before the union, there's a divine one. So what if they wanted to make that same argument I just made, right? If you're going to use counting by identity, those are two different hypostases. The difference is, in this case, in the Miaphysite model, it's marked by distinct times. Whereas you have the divine only and the divine human in the same sense, according to what Erhan just postulated. At the same time. Whereas in Miaphysitism, it's not at the same time. In Miaphysitism, it's the divine on its own before the incarnation. The moment of the incarnation, he creates a human hypostasis and instantaneously, the same temporal moment, instantaneously makes it one with himself. So he couldn't make that same argument against me. But now I avoided the mutability issue, avoided the two hypostases issue, but I can also explain this whole Theotokos, Christotokos thing he's making. He's basically trying to argue the reason why we say Theotokos is because we're referring to that subject. That subject is God, right? My model can account for that. Before the union, the divinity was the only thing with individual subsistence. That's the vertical aspect in my model. The humanity doesn't have that. And in the moment of the incarnation, the flesh, that human hypostasis we conceive in thought alone, the human hypostasis doesn't have its own individual subsistence. So because of that, that pre-existing subject, that enteleki, that ipseity, I've used that word before on my streams, that enteleki, that ipseity remains the same, even in the incarnation. So whereas you have divine only and divine human at the same time in different senses, my divine only, and then after the incarnation, my divine human are not at the same time for you to apply this counting method where now you'd have two different hypostases. It wouldn't work. You can continue.
Theotokos. It's not just that it's useful, it fundamentally misses the mark about the identity of Christ. And that's why we call her the mother of God, because the person she gave birth to is a divine person. That's basically the fundamental reason. We don't
Exactly.
say synthetos tokos or something like that. We say Theotokos, right? Not a composite mother, but mother of God. That's basically what I wanted to like briefly discuss before we start with some of the things that maybe you want to present or maybe Kai wants to present.
Well, I would.
Brothers, pause here.
Quote something real quick.
Can you guys maybe explain for the audience, Kairos or iKan, can you explain what exactly is counting by identity? What is counting by division? What's the difference between two hypostases making one and one hypostasis having two different essences? Because people might not have known that background of what exactly I just said.
Kairos, you got this.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
So counting by identity, in the more analytic view, the more modern view, is just taking a set of things, and then within the set of things, if you view a distinction between each member, you associate their own number. It doesn't allow for partitioning. It doesn't allow for any type of proportionality within it. Counting by division is when you fix the kind of thing and then you partition by the kind of thing. You say the same kind of thing, and then you count the partitions of the thing, and you give each one their own units.
Okay, and iKan, what's the difference between saying two hypostases make one versus one hypostasis has two different essences, the Neo-Chalcedonian model?
Right, that's the whole debate of hypostases. Our fathers, they had a very simple answer to this. The flesh is hypostatic, which, by the way, the Chalcedonians would concede. They say that it has individual properties, and I'm pretty sure that Erhan talks about this later on. But the flesh is hypostatic, therefore it's a hypostasis. It's that simple. And so when the divinity and the humanity unite, the hypostatic union is not just a union that happens in one hypostasis or the other. It's a union that is a coming together of two hypostases that become one. And so the one composite hypostasis is the product of the two uniting. And so it contains both and is equally both. And now on the other hand, if you have a simple hypostasis that changes and becomes composite, they want to say it doesn't change, but let's be realistic here. It gains a
By the way, let me pause right here.
Right.
Damascene verbatim says the hypostasis was previously simple and formerly simple, not formally, formerly in the past, formerly simple and became composite. Continue.
Right. So this is an inherent change. And one, I noticed some people are saying, I think there's someone in the chat that's arguing, well, this is just the substrate, so it doesn't change, which is basically Erhan's argument as well. It doesn't change, but the properties just gains a new set. Well, one of those properties of the humanity is being susceptible to change. And so when you make that intrinsic to the divinity, you are still making the divinity susceptible to mutability.
Right. That's an argument I've made. Like if someone is super stubborn, right? They don't want to admit that the God actually changed in the Neo-Chalcedonian model. They don't want to admit it at all. Like no matter what, they'll take similar routes that Erhan just did. When push comes to shove, you just ask them, does the word have the properties of humanity? Yes. Is it a property of humanity to change? Yes. Did God change? Simple as that. Let's continue.
Because it's really excellent, especially as you get into the latter parts of it when you get to talking about St. John Damascus. And I forgot to turn my light on here. It says
at Pechanga Resort Casino in Temecula.
not too lengthy. This kind of argument from St. John Damascus, he's saying, would not easily apply to the whole range of hypostases. John's philosophy normally recognizes it is a theory specifically geared towards human beings, or at least towards rational beings. Perhaps this is the beginning of the notion of personal existence in Eastern patristic thought. But there's little evidence that John was conscious of the additional distinctions. Be that as it may, we can here discern. He's talking about whether or not John Damascus was crucial for future personalist theology or philosophy. John Damascus's individuality, philosophy of theory of individuality, addresses the problem of the conception of the hypostasis as identified, accepting that the hypostasis is essentially independent existence. The Damascene argues that the contingent origin of this existence as and other equally contingent aspects of the subsequent history of individuals are what makes them unique. Interestingly, the identification of the hypostasis as individual existence with historical origin even permitted John Damascus to integrate the traditional notion of the confluence of properties into his own new theory, arguing that in subsistence of the human nature in the Logos, John says, quote, even though his flesh was not without characteristic properties, still the collection of these properties and the coming into being of the composition of his flesh did not happen independently, but in the hypostasis of the Logos. The flesh, therefore,
you guys catch that? You guys catch that? Damascene is saying the flesh never got its own individual properties on its own, right? Immediately, it was in the word that the idioms of the flesh, the particular properties of the flesh came to be. It was in the word. Keep playing. Look what Dyer's about to say.
Not have its own hypostasis, but only that of the Logos. So this is what I argue.
Pause right here. Go back 10 seconds. Let's listen to that again. 10 seconds.
Flesh, therefore, does not have its own hypostasis, but only that of the Logos. So this is what I argued
right here.
Years ago.
He said the flesh doesn't have its own hypostasis, but its hypostasis is the hypostasis of the Logos itself. So now the hypostasis of the Logos hosts two different essences. The hypostasis of the divinity in the unique, only begotten sense, right, being generated from the Father, that is belonging to the divine hypostasis. But now divine hypostasis becomes the hypostasis of the flesh. Now, I said this many times. The hypostasis of the word becomes the hypostasis of the flesh. Was it always the hypostasis of the flesh? No. Is it the hypostasis of the flesh intrinsically or extrinsically? It's impossible for it to be extrinsically. If it's extrinsically, then another thing has to be that intrinsic human hypostasis, right? It has to be relationally given. So one has to have it first to communicate to the other. So if you're going to affirm the hypostasis of the Logos, that pure, simple, non-composite, immutable hypostasis, one day decided to become the hypostasis of another thing, that same hypostasis, then you're now affirming God is mutable. The hypostasis became mutable. It's now subject to being the hypostasis of another thing. Now the hypostasis that's on the cross is the one that was eternally begotten. Now the hypostasis which spatially changes throughout time and space is the very hypostasis of that simple divine Logos. So now someone can ask, well, how does Miaphysitism avoid that? You guys have a composite hypostasis. You guys have a union of two natures. You guys believe God died, God suffered, God walked, etc., etc., etc. The difference is our metaphysical account is not the same as yours. We don't make the divine only become the composite. We make the divine only with another object compose a whole. That's a big difference. For us, the word is analogically a part to a whole. For them, the word is a whole with parts. That's a difference. So now when we look at the word, examining it with the flesh, these two hypostases which come into union, I can see the flesh is in every way extrinsic to the logos. But because the thing which is constituted is one object, there's now one composite hypostasis which comes to be out of two, there is no longer a divine-only thing that can be examined on its own extramentally for me to apply mutability or immutability to it. It's now numerically one with another object composing one object. And intrinsic and extrinsic relations have to be between two or more things. Because we don't have a duality anymore, we don't have this issue. So we have a completely different metaphysic. We can actually account for the statement, God died without change. Whereas if you want to say God died, you have two options. You make it an extrinsic feature, so you're now an Antiochian Nestorian. Welcome back, Theodoret. Welcome back, Theodore of Mopsuestia. You've even gone into the Latin West. Welcome back, Tertullian and Novatian and Augustine. Not the actual other guys like Hilary and Ambrose. Those guys are Miaphysite. You're now regressing into something much worse, the Antiochian Nestorian Christology, that ancient one. But if you're going to take that other view, that Neo-Chalcedonian and hypostaton intrinsic view, then you're completely worse than a Nestorian now. You're now affirming divine mutability. Let's continue.
This first started popping up is that if you read what John Damascus says clear as day on the Orthodox faith, especially when he talks about the descent of Christ into Hades, it's another way to really kind of put a kill shot in this whole argument, because it shows that the hypostasis of the word is the only hypostasis in terms of that asymmetrical Christology that David is talking about. And if you read the Bathorelos text, there's multiple chapters that also make this distinction between symmetrical and asymmetrical. All that means is just viewing it from two different vantage points. If we're talking about the decision of the Fifth Council, though, it specifies clear as day via the Edict of St. Justinian that you have to identify the hypostasis, properly speaking, as that of the divine subject of the word. That subject doesn't undergo substantial change. That's another key point, that because the Oriental so-called Orthodox metaphysic doesn't recognize these layers and levels to what we talk about. When we talk about Christ assuming a new nature, they cannot conceive of that as a both and it has to be an either or. So in the case of Christ assuming a new nature, that can't be this asymmetrical relationship between the divine subject, the logos, and the human, fully human nature, but not human person that he assumed, or human subject. They can't conceive of that. They can only conceive of it as a tertium quid ultimately. And when you start getting into, well, but wait a minute, doesn't nature, person, will, energy, etc., in the Trinity reflect into Christology? I mean, if Christ is the second person of the Godhead becoming incarnate, then clearly the relationship of nature, person, will, and energy in the Trinity is going to reflect into Christology. But this is the point at which, precisely because they don't allow these nuance and layers in their metaphysics, they have to say no, and they have to end up with a tertium quid position.
Pause right here. He just argued you need reflexivity, and then in the same breath says there's nuance. You know the difference between two things being simply reflexive versus things having nuance? You just said a contradiction. Did anyone catch that? We have an issue for not having the same categorical reflexivity, right? Will is common to essence, energy is common to essence, Christ has two essences, therefore two wills and energies. He's saying we don't have that reflexivity, therefore we're not catching nuance. But you don't understand, nuance is why we lack that Neo-Chalcedonian system. That's the issue. Continue.
I'd like to add some things in regards to, first of all, with like
and actually, pause right here. Pause right here. If anyone noticed as well, Dyer argued there's no substantial change. He's doing a sleight of hand here, hoping no one catches on. He's trying to say the actual substance of the logos, right, the divine essence, that didn't change. But there's another sense where there was a change. He's going to make that clear. He's going to say, clear as day, there's another aspect where there's change. We just deny a essential change, right? The divine essence isn't the thing which changes here. Something else changes, which we'll get to.
Which, by the way, that's Arian and Origin. It was the Arians who would subordinate the hypostasis of the Son to the divine essence.
Right.
In a sense, they try to incorporate asymmetrical Christology because the two hypostases, only one of them is a prosopon, and that's the divine hypostasis. But you have this kind of confusion. For example, I believe in there's it's their patriarchs. I think it was Theodosius of Alexandria. There's a dispute called Agnote controversy, and it was about whether Christ was truly ignorant in his humanity or not. So there's a person called Themistius who claimed that Christ was truly I believe he argued that Christ was truly ignorant, and he argued that, well, since Christ has a triandric will and energy, he must have had like ignorance in the human part of that will. And Theodosius basically says there is no human part; there's only the divine part. And it might seem like contradictory, but if you read the Three Monophysite Christology book by, I think Chestnuts was
right
that wrote the book.
Can you run us down the historical argument from the Orthodox side, the Oriental Orthodox side, and the Agnoete side, and try and give us a summary of that controversy?
Right. So obviously, Saint Severus, he taught that there was one composite nature, and will, and etc. And so Themistius of Alexandria, he comes along. He claims to be a student of Saint Severus, and he says that, well, there's a theandric will and theandric energy. Therefore, according to the humanity, Christ does not know the hour, from the Gospel of Matthew. And so his whole point was that because it is a composite mind or a theandric mind, according to the human aspect, Christ wouldn't know the hour, and so Christ does. He has a limited knowledge. That's what agnote means. It means ignorant. And so the Miaphysite fathers, as well as, by the way, the Chalcedonians also jumped on this. They responded to the agnote by explaining that the will and energy of the humanity are deified. And so when they are deified, that means that Christ is no longer ignorant. And so the Chalcedonians and the Orthodox Miaphysites, they agreed on this. And Justinian also, I think he has an encyclical on this, or I forgot what he had, but he had a work on this. And Maximus talks about it. Damascene talks about it. It was a big deal. And yeah.
Yeah. So one thing that to point out, both in the agnote issue and energy and will in Christ, you'll find, for example, a statement in Athanasius's Contra Apollinarius: the will was of the Godhead alone, being manifested through the flesh. In Oriental Orthodox metaphysics, you have the origin of any activity, and this would even apply in some sense to the intellect of Christ, the mind of Christ. You have the origin of the activity in the instrument, right? Nobody wants to say the human nature of Christ has its own subsistent intellect, right? It can view itself and then view itself in relation to other things. No one is going to apply that sort of agency, but we all still believe there's a human mind, right? He assumed human mind. St. Gregory says he mixed mind with mind. Athanasius says he assumed human nature with our mind, our sense, etc. So what do you do with this issue? If you assumed human mind, you assume divine mind, what are you going to do? So same with the energy and the will. You're going to make one active, and the other one is going to be active, but insofar as it's an instrument of the other. Not that it's merely passive, it still has that active aspect, but insofar as the word is activating it, which is a big difference. So that origin of that act, it would be divine, right? It would be God himself moving it because he presubsisted the union. The instrument would be human, and the thing resulting after our speculation of both of those aspects is divine human. So I don't know if Erhan quite catches that. Erhan is trying to make it seem as if we only have a divine-only mind, a divine-only energy, a divine-only will. That's not the case. You want to continue?
He basically explains that like the self-subsistent, the prosopic part of the divine hypostasis is what actually allows the will and energy and even the nature to be enumerated. So in the sense you have like divine only will, nature, and it kind of gets like a bit.
I called it. I don't even remember this. Yeah, I do not even remember him saying this. I called it. Let's continue.
And you kind of had this harmonization, but the harmonization seems to be a little lacking in terms of some of the quotes. The one from Father George Florovsky was from His Creation and Redemption, and another quote also from Zakuber that St. John Damascus makes. I think it was yes. He says, "It is therefore impossible for that which once came into being independently to receive another beginning of its existence. For hypostasis is independent existence." This is an important quote because he's not just saying that there cannot be another hypostasis that unites with a hypostasis, because the definition of hypostasis is that it independently exists. So you can't have two independently existing things becoming one independently existing thing. That's a logical contradiction. But he also says, look, hypostasis is independent existence, and it came into being independently. Now, in the case of Christ, he came into being independently. Again, when I say came into being, not in the sense that he was created in time, but that he's begotten of the Father. How did his being is begotten of the Father? That's why, like, you actually have a justification for referring Christ as a divine hypostasis on that level. So that's something I also want to add very shortly.
Pause right here. Big mistake, or just let the ad play. I think there's an ad you can mute.
What is up, everybody? We are here.
So basically, he made a blunder. He's saying that the divine hypostases cannot acquire a new mode of coming into being. There's an issue. St. Athanasius, St. Ambrose, when they read certain passages like Jeremiah 31, Proverbs 8, when they see types of Christ saying like the Lord created me, they'll say that it's Christ speaking on account of his human nature. Even their own saints do this. Their own saints say the divine hypostases became a creature. Sophronius says this. That's one of their saints. It says that the divine hypostases became a creature. So now, if you're just going to flat out reject that, watch this question. It's going to be a very simple question. Think about it, Erhan. Which hypostasis was born in Bethlehem? Which one? The divine one? Change God. The human one? Two hypostases, Nestorianism. The Oriental Orthodox composite hypostases from two hypostases? Welcome to the team. Those are your options. if you're going to say that the hypostasis can never acquire a new mode of coming into being, then what was it that was born in Bethlehem? Which hypostasis was that? Let's continue.
All right, what's up, man?
All right, is it my turn?
Yes.
It seems like it's yes.
All right. Okay. So this, I'll try not to ramble on for too long. That was a very good presentation, David. Very informative, spot on. One thing that I would like to just maybe make explicitly clear, because I see this question pop up very frequently, and it's really just, it's a really good question, but it's a very simple response to it. We always say, like, for example, that Christ is a divine only hypostasis, but yet we speak of two natures. And so a lot of people kind of get confused. It's like, what do you mean divine only, or that he's a divine hypostasis? Just in simple, plain language, all we're really referring to here is that the hypostasis is uncreated. Like, it's a divine hypostasis in that it is uncreated.
Pause right here. Why does Damascene say on the Orthodox faith the hypostasis was previously simple? Earlier it existed without being created. Later it assumed a human nature. And now the same hypostasis is both created in his humanity and uncreated in his divinity. So why does your saint say the hypostasis is a creature, the divine one? You're going to say that it's only uncreated, that it's only divine? How do you make sense of the human properties? Where are you going to predicate it? What are you going to do with this issue that I've been raising? Let's continue.
Human hypostasis, it indicates that it is created. And now, that's just a straightforward response. That has a lot of implications behind it, though. It's a simple response, but the theology behind it, the metaphysics behind it, like when you say a human hypostasis, you have now things that you need to take into consideration, like gnomic willing. And so now that becomes proper to a human or a created hypostasis. And you get into St. Maximus and what is the problem with Christ having a gnomic will. And so why Christ does not have a gnomic will, well, he doesn't have a human hypostasis. And then so you'll see this problem. It poses a significant barrier for the Orientals to address this issue of gnomic willing when they claim that well, there is a human hypostasis in Christ. So they're not going to be able to properly address gnomic willing.
Pause right here.
When you
believe it or not, the two hypostases become one. I didn't know if you knew that. You think we're a Syrian Church of the East, that we believe in reality there's this divine hypostasis over here, there's this human hypostasis over here, and therefore we have to apply a certain will for it, and therefore we're going to have to give it a gnomic will, and that it has deliberation. Let me remind you, the two things become one. And this one thing, the prophet rightly spoke, saying, before the child reaches of age, he would have already selected the good. That's Severus cites the same verse in Isaiah. The child already selected the good, even before his age of deliberation, because he doesn't have a deliberation. He's divine. He's God incarnate. So he doesn't have flip-flopping, I can sin, but I don't feel like sinning. Again, you're presupposing Maximus's own presuppositions during the monothelite issues. That wasn't a problem we were involved in. Why are you bringing it up as if we have our own human hypostases and we have to make a decision what kind of will we're going to give to it? I don't get how this guy thinks. Let's continue.
Say that the hypostasis of Christ is divine only, that has the implications of, well, it is eternally begotten of the Father. And so, well, what is the implication there? Well, if Christ is only, quote unquote, one nature that the Orientals want you to profess, well, if he's one nature and there's two hypostases there, human and divine, so does that mean that a part of Christ is eternally begotten while another part is not eternally begotten? So we're safeguarding this absurdity by making certain to say that we have a divine only hypostasis in Christ. So that was what I wanted to say there.
Do I even begin, or can my brothers explain whether Christ is part this or part that? iKan and Kairos, if you'd like.
I'll cover just a brief bit. Kai fails to distinguish the difference between subjects of attribution and the purpose of attribution, or the forgot the word, but there's a good word for it.
Like the formal cause?
Yes. Here he's arguing that any type of predication that uses different ways of predicating. For example, most people are familiar with the law of non-contradiction, which is that an object cannot be both X and not X in that same way at the same time, in the same respect. And so he's arguing that we either have to affirm different respects, for example, Christ is immortal in one respect and mortal in the other respect. And if we do that, then we need two natures. And then if we don't do that, then it's a tertium quid. But the whole issue with this is that we can still affirm different respects without affirming two natures after the union, and without affirming two hypostases after the union. He hasn't presented an argument for why we would need two natures after the union to establish that.
Right.
Again, a formal cause within the object is not the same as two subjects of attribution. You wouldn't need two natures to say that this nature is mortal and this nature is immortal for you to be able to say that Christ is mortal and immortal. Otherwise, that would basically lead to three simultaneous things. So you have the two natures, which are simultaneous with the one hypostasis, and the one hypostasis is mortal, and the human nature is mortal, and the human nature suffers, and the hypostasis suffers. But these are still two separate things and two distinct things, because as Damascene says, nature is not hypostasis. And they love to quote that against us. They love to say, look at the Monophysites, they confuse nature and hypostasis. They say this was the error of all heretics. And they say, here's the Monophysites keep doing this. Well, you're the ones that want to make a sharp distinction between hypostasis and nature. And you want to say there's two natures after the union and one hypostasis after the union, so that all three exist simultaneously. Then you're going to have a problem with which one is the proper subject of attribution for the properties, for the predicates, because you're the one that made this distinction, and you're the one that says after the union, and you're the one that's allowing the predication.
Right. You can even demonstrate why diverse formal causes doesn't lead to diverse subjects of attribution. With an example, I'm sure Kai would love. Let's talk about tertium quids for a second. Let's think about a really salty drink. Let's say vinegar or something. I don't know. Water mixed with vinegar, right? That's going to be its own drink. And then you're going to have another drink, which is going to be like mango juice, right? If I pour them together, and now there's like a mixed liquid, right? The third thing, it's neither this or that, right? It doesn't have opposing predicates. It just has in the middle kind of predicates. You can still find and locate a formal cause for its salty taste, right? You can find that kind, even though there's no such thing as that vinegar anymore. Likewise, you can find a kind of form of that sweet taste, even though there's no mango juice anymore. So even in tertium quids, which you love to bring up, you can still locate formal causes. The formal cause for why it tastes a little salty is something that doesn't have its own subject of attribution. The formal cause for why it tastes a little sweet is something which doesn't have its own subject of attribution. So even in the case of tertium quids, which you are bringing up, it shows that there's no valid inference to hop from one to the other. There's no valid inference to say, oh, well, he has this opposing property and that opposing property, therefore you need two things. That isn't always the case. And perfect example would be the body and the soul, one which actually has P and not P properties, right? I, as a whole man, you can call me rational, but you can call me also earthly, right? You can speak of me according to both of my natures, which are parts here. No one would say I'm partly rational or I'm partly earthly. Likewise, when I find actual opposing predicates, like being divisible in my body and indivisible in my soul, no one is going to argue that now Kai is refuting two different things. That right now, two different things is having a discussion with iKan, who is another two different things, and Kairos, who is another two different things. The man is one. He is one from out of two. And having opposing properties in different senses is not collapsible to two subjects of attribution after the union. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Even in tertium quids, you can find diverse formal causes without diverse subjects of attribution. Am I kind of making sense, brothers?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that we even see in the fathers, they use the same analogy that you're using for the body and soul. St. Cyril says that there are two natures, and we've gone over this a bunch of times within the OO community. There's two natures of body and soul to be analogous to Christ. And then after their union, there is one composite nature, and the distinction or enumeration is abolished after the union. So then you'd just be contradicting St. Cyril here on the matter of enumeration. You wouldn't have two natures of body and soul. Like St. Cyril says, there's only one nature of body and soul.
Someone commented, Agen, when are you going to defend monothelitism? If I ever become Chalcedonian. Because of the earliest Latin minutes of your fifth God-breathed ecumenical council, which says there's one energy in Christ. And the entirety of the Pentarchy accepting monoenergism with the typos and the ecthesis. That's when I'm going to start defending it, when I become a part of your church. Aren't you praying for that? Let's continue.
Another thing that I wanted to kind of talk about is, so a lot of you guys who have followed me on YouTube with my community posts and Substack, over the past couple of weeks, I've been putting out several
I'm adding those
articles.
to the chat, by the way, while you're talking, your Substacks.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I've been basically doing them like every couple of days, every day, just trying to keep up. But really, I'm taking a metaphysics approach. So this is really setting out the Orthodox metaphysical paradigm, setting out the Nestorian, the Orientals, and really going into great detail to help people understand where the objections are from the Orthodox perspective and how to properly understand Orthodox metaphysics. And it's very interesting because up until today, the Orientals have been completely silent. They have not responded. And somebody posted in the Discord server just before we went live a supposed refutation on one of my articles. It was the one where I'm showing Saint Basil basically using person and hypostasis synonymously to refer to the same ontology, because he's basically identifying Jesus in his humanity as the divine person. And I quickly glanced at the article posted, and all of this stuff, I'm going to respond to it thoroughly. I'm just going to let you guys kind of respond to me, and then I will respond to you. But it's quite laughable, the level of stupidity that they've come up with to refute. So
pause right here. At least some people attempted to refute, right? Haven't I been responding to all of your streams? Aren't some Oriental Orthodox apparently responding to your blogs or whatever? Why don't we keep it video format so I can keep responding? I'm doing it right now. Why haven't you responded to anything I've said? Why are you sitting on the high horse as if we're the ones who should respond to you, but you don't have that same right to respond to us? That's so hypocritical. No one responded to my blog posts. No one's going to read my blog posts, even though I have like what, 4 failed attempts now, which add up together is like 12 hours of streaming. Okay, let's continue.
in Oriental Christology and Tridology, they make an ontological distinction between person and hypostasis. And
Pause
they
right
do
here.
this as a
We don't say there's one floating ontology over here, that's the person, and there's one floating ontology over here, that's the hypostasis. When we take that term, prosopon, its literal meaning, it's the onomata, the mask, the appearance of a thing. That isn't a thing which floats around and has substrative principle, right? When we just take that bare bones definition. Hypostasis is an ontological thing. It's that underlying reality. Hypo means under, stasis means standing. Like when we say something is substantial, substantially there, substantive. Sub means under, stantia means standing. So prosopon, according to the fathers, when you have a hypostasis, which exists on its own, and it's giving those faculties of agency, right? It exists on its own, can do things on its own. You're going to attribute it an onomata, a mask, an appearance. But nobody's saying prosopon is one thing over here that it's its own ontology. Hypostasis is a totally different ontology. And then nature is kind of like a third different ontology. Nobody is thinking that way. Don't strawman us. Let's continue.
sleight of hand to preserve, allegedly preserve Christ's or the Logos' immutability, so that when the incarnation happens, nothing of the divine hypostasis undergoes any kind of change. That's all absorbed by the human hypostasis. But to say that there's only one person, the self-subsistence of the divine hypostasis is where the personhood comes from, and then the inseparability of the non-self-subsistent hypostasis from the human side gets subsumed underneath this prosopic ontology. And so basically what you have here is that the pre-incarnate.
His argument, and I want you to tap in for this, like his argument is that we have hypostases of the Logos, a human hypostasis comes in, and then the prosopon that belong to the divine hypostasis now takes on this human hypostasis. So you have two hypostases in one person. Is that what we believe, or does that sound a little bit like the Assyrians? What do you think, iKan? iKan, are you here? Oh, it seems like he's busy. So that is, I'm gonna just answer. That was rhetorical. Yes, that's what the Assyrians believe. The Assyrian Church of the East. They're the ones who say there's one prosopon for the two hypostases. We don't say that, or at least not in the way Kai is making it out to be. We say two hypostases come together.
My bad.
Then
my
the
bad.
two hypostases become one, and there's one person.
My mic
is your mic working now?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you explain the difference between the Assyrian Church of the East's two hypostases versus the Oriental Orthodox's two hypostases?
Right. So basically, our model is very different in terms. Sorry, I'm reading the chat. No, my mic was just not working. It's okay. Basically, there is what I like to call a substantial or hypostatic prosopon, and then the non-substantial or anhypostatic prosopon. Now, the an, keep in mind the prefix an means non. So non-hypostatic, non-substantial is basically in Greek and Latin a mask. It's the external characteristics. For example, a famous analogy for this is an emperor and his and the servant, or the agent of his, the person that he sends out in his name, the legate. So an emperor sends a legate to someone and he makes a command. And so let's say that person now disrespects the legate. It's considered as disrespect to the emperor. So the legate comes in the name of the emperor. He comes in the authority of the emperor. He comes in the prosopon of the emperor, the person of the emperor.
Right, and there's
likewise-
also biblical application. Paul
Right,
says,
I was about to
"If
make
I've
sure of that.
forgiven you, I've forgiven you in the person of Christ."
Exactly. In the person of Christ, and the authority of Christ, and the power of Christ, and the honor of Christ, dignity and name. And so that was what's called a non-substantial prosopon. For example, we see in Sibelius, the heretic who invented modalism or Sabellianism, he would argue for three persons, three prosopon, and one hypostasis, one individual substance, one substance in general. And so it almost sounded like orthodoxy, but the whole idea of Sibelius was that it is one hypostasis changing the mask, changing the external appearance, changing the dignity or the name, and swapping between the three faces. Now, on the other hand, we had Nestorius, who did the opposite heresy. Nestorius said there was two hypostases of Christ that were united merely by name, honor, dignity, authority, power. And this was what his idea of one person is. This is why Nestorius is famous for saying one person. Now, in terms of the other prosopon, this is what's called a substantial or hypostatic prosopon. This happens when the person or persona or prosopon has its own individual substance or its own hypostasis that belongs to it and one alone. So if in any way the hypostasis or person is shared, that's not substantial, that's not hypostatic, because that would requires a plurality. But when it has its own substance and its own hypostases, this is what's considered a substantial person or substantial prosopon.
Do you guys get that difference? There's an hypostatic person and an hypostatic person. The way that what's his name? Pi is trying to argue the Oriental Orthodox believe is that there's the hypostasis of Christ and there's that person of God the Word before the union. It's an hypostatic, but then it becomes the person of another hypostasis. That's what Nestorius says. We don't say that two hypostases merely unite under one prosopon, and that's how we preserve immutability. We argue that two hypostases become one at the level in which they are. Two hypostases making one hypostasis. And because that one hypostasis is rational, individually subsisting, bears all the marks of agency, right? It's not inhering in another thing. It's just one concrete subject. Then we give it its own personhood, its onomata, its name, its character, its appearance. Let's continue.
Son is not coextensive with the incarnate Christ.
Is that
It's
because,
not
is that why they think that in hypostatized means a substantial change in the logos?
Well, they basically will give us the critique that they're saying that the human nature does not have its own respective hypostasis. And so if the divine hypostasis is the host for the humanity, the accidents are inhering into that divine hypostasis, and therefore you have mutability in Christ. That's essentially
Yes.
their
Pause.
I thought.
Yes. Let me guess, guys. You guys think they're gonna respond? You guys think maybe we're gonna say this doesn't follow because we don't affirm that premise, we deny that premise? You think that's what they're gonna do? Let's take a look.
That, like when Agen came on, he was arguing about Maximus's use of in hypostatized. He was arguing for some form of third nature or tertium quid because he thought in hypostatized means that he's now that he's composite.
Pause right here.
Substantial change.
That's not what I critique. What Kai just said, he represented my argument well. Thank you, Kai. I appreciate that. Dyer thinks I was arguing some whole different thing that they now affirm a tertium quid thing. No. Keep playing.
So the critique was, why do you guys keep saying that he underwent no change, which is what we say in the liturgy, and yet at the same time he underwent change by becoming incarnate? Well, it's just two different senses of the word change. But what I'm asking is this prosopic subsuming? Is this the same idea? Because they don't seem to be able to
here.
of different types of.
He did a Freudian slip. So while he's asking, Kai, is this what Agen really argued? He doesn't oopsie. He says there's different senses of the word change. iKan, can you tell me why that's so devastating?
So he's admitting that there is a sense where the hypostases did change. he does concede at a real change, but he's just gonna say that there's a different sense where it doesn't change, and he's gonna make the argument that there's two different senses, and we're going back to where we started.
Let's continue.
Change. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, Jay. I don't know what exactly their arguments are.
Okay.
I have not thoroughly listened to Agen. I'm just going to wait until we've put up out all our stuff. I'll see what their
Okay, but does their position seem to?
Pause this
There
real-
we go.
Pause real quick.
There's the answer. We'll do it. We'll do it after we finish our streams.
Yeah, I love how like he's admitting that he's never watched any of our stuff. He's never seen any of our arguments. He's never responded to any of it or even took a look at it. And yet here he is spending hours critiquing us. And by the way, like going after us. He's not just like a plain critique of Oriental Orthodoxy in general. No, he's making specific critiques against us, against specifically Agen, obviously. And yet here he is admitting that he's never actually seen any of our work. He hasn't watched any of the parts. He hasn't been here from the beginning. Now, what I
And
like
coincidentally,
Dyer
he
has-
steelmanned my argument very well as well. So if you've never seen my stuff, how did you just do that?
now Dyer admits he has, and I like how there's a little bit of an implication that he's having a problem with it because he's asking Kai for a clear answer, and he himself basically conceded a change. So, yeah.
You'd think after the perfect steelman, he now provides a refutation. Well, it doesn't follow because of this. We deny that premise. The Orientals misunderstand what we mean. No. Oh, don't worry. When we're done with our parts, we'll deal with it. Not right now. Not right now. That argument Agen presented, he's been presenting. It's been what? It's been 1 hour, 30 minutes on this stream, 2 hours on part 3, 2 hours on part 2, 4 hours on part 1. No response. He said it himself. Let's continue.
Change, right? Because there's not a distinction between the logos and the nature that he has, the nature person distinction. So when the logos becomes incarnate, does that necessitate some type of subsuming or substantial change, which leads to the tertium quid?
I think they'll probably just sorry for interrupting, but I think they'll probably say change. Well, the divine nature doesn't change. The divine hypostasis didn't change in the union. Neither of the hypostasis changed. They just united like the body and the soul is, and that's basically the main paradigm they use. The body soul.
Yes.
They form a natural union and produce another nature, which
Yeah, but you can still
actually
distinguish the body and the soul. So they don't like to talk about the distinction after the union, right? Other than
Pause right here.
that's what they're often called.
Let's talk about body and soul in the patristics. Verbatim quote, letter 46, the second letter to Sixensis from St. Cyril of Alexandria. Let us take the example of an ordinary man. We recognize two natures in him, for there is one nature of the soul and another of the body. But we divide these only at a theoretical level. Rather, we accept the distinction is only in our mental intuitions. We do not grant that they have a radical separateness. This is why the two are no longer two, but through both of them, the one living creature is rendered complete. Let's talk about body and soul in the Fathers. Let's talk about it, where they just explain the exact paradigm we have. Two things becoming one, no longer two, theoretical division between them. Very easy. And Erhan steelmanned it perfectly. Why we don't have a change in our model. The hypostasis of the word doesn't change. He unites to a human hypostasis, the two become one. Awesome. Thank you for the steelman. Is there a refutation? Let's listen.
You know, the tertium quid argument is usually made.
They will say we are distinguishing them like in the sense of like they are parts before the union, right? And even those who speak of distinction after the union, they will say we distinguish, we just don't call them two, which is just kind of
Okay, so
Yeah,
basically
yeah,
it's just sophistry is where it ends up.
Severus of Antioch actually makes this argument in Sergius.
Pause right here.
So I really like they're conceding the body soul distinction. They're conceding that there's a distinction after the union of the body and soul, and yet it's not like they say there's two natures of body and soul after the union. It's not like they deny the one nature of the body and soul. So I'm not even sure what the argument here is. They don't say three natures. So now they're looking at us and they're saying, why don't you say two natures? Oh, just because we don't like the terms? Well, do you not like the terms three natures? That's your only opposition to three natures? No, but there is a real argument for why there's not two natures after the union. And the fact is that for there to be a union, there has to be oneness. And even Damascene concedes this in Contra Jacobitis, paragraphs 70 and 71, I believe, or chapter 70 and 71. I'm not sure which numbering they like to go by. But Damascene himself makes a concession, and he says that, behold, things that are united, they are one, but not one in every way, but as they are united. So the category of the union, or whatever the way that there's going to be a union, there's going to be oneness in that category, in that, or in what way that is. So if there is a natural union, which Ephesus teaches, they like to say they agree with us on the phrase natural union, but they clearly don't. If there is a natural union, then there is a one nature after the union.
Right. I want to
And-
point out the fact, like, or keep going. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I was just going to say the composition is what allows for the distinction. If it's a composite nature, which is what we believe, then there's a distinction after the union, but not the division. And division is duality, because if you agree the unity is oneness, then division is duality.
School
Right.
in
So
many ways.
before you continue, they're poking fun. Oh, Orientals believe in a distinction, but not counting two. There's two different distinctions when we're talking about nature of Christ that people think are one and the same. There's the distinction in natural quality, and then there's the numerical distinction of the two natures. Those are different things. The numerical distinction of the two natures is in the mind alone, only in the mind. You only have this 1 and 2 in the mind. That numerical distinction is in the mind alone, that this is the word and this is the flesh. The distinction that exists in reality, that's founded in the composition itself, is a distinction in natural quality. That is extramental. Distinction in natural quality remains in the union. In the union, the set of characteristics of humanity is different from the set of characteristics of divinity, but they're all predicated to one subject of predication. So, depends what we're going to talk about. If we're talking about distinction in natural quality, that will never force a duality. Never. If we're talking about the numerical distinction, we allow for that. That's in the mind alone, so that duality doesn't remain after the union. So it sounds all funny, haha, they distinguish the two natures, but don't say they're two. What distinction are we talking about? The natural quality distinction won't allow us to speak of two after the union. And the numerical distinction that we do, we are the ones who define what we're doing. We're saying it's in the mind alone. What's so funny? Let's continue.
And Severus was trying to correct him, and one of the things that he does say, I might try to find a reference on like the page, but he basically says we do distinguish them, but we don't call them two. Like he does say something to that effect. I'll find it too.
Yeah.
No, you know who else does that? Pause right here. The quote I just said, you can find this word for word. Let us take the example of an ordinary man. We recognize two natures, etc., etc. I just repeated the whole quote. You can go back and listen. The last thing that said about that paragraph, this is why the two are no longer two. Again, this is why the two are no longer two. That's a verbatim quote. I'm not trying to do some, that's what it implicit. No, this is verbatim. This is not an implicit citation or anything. The two are no longer two. Let's continue.
I can just continue there with the thing before I lose my train of thought. So they're trying to refute this idea where we identify person and hypostasis as referring to the same ontology.
Let me pause just in case someone complains. That two distinct sets of natural quality, they're going to say that leads to two natures. Let me ask you, this one composite hypostasis, does it have particular properties of the word? They're going to say yeah. Does it have particular properties of the flesh? They're going to say yeah. They're going to say there's two different sets, two different particular property sets. If that's the case, why don't you have two particulars? Because they know the same principle as us. Sets of predicate will never collapse into diverse subjects of attribution. One subject of attribution can have those diverse sets while remaining one. That's what a composition is. Composition is one with some inherent non-identity in predicates. That's why it's a composite and not a simple one. Let's continue.
Also, before we do continue, when they speak of sets, you're also invoking a bunch of ideas about ontological commitments, and he's going to call us like nominalists in a bit here. But sets are purely conceptual, unless you take the Aristotelian essentialist view, which none of the fathers, right, the pre-Chalcedonian fathers, they've never, expressed this view. So I don't know where you come from this logical leap of if you express two sets or two conceptual groupings, you now also express two real ontologies or two real particular natures, or so on and so forth.
Imagine if you apply this to the divine essence. You said the divine essence is just reducible to a set of divine properties.
Yeah.
What distinguishes
Let's say
God
that,
from
let's say
humanity?
that. Agen, let's say that, because Erhan's
Okay.
going to touch on that in a bit. He's going to make a major blunder, and he's going to basically concede the bundle theory of substances. But we'll get to that.
Let's continue.
This article that they put out, and I'm like, if this is the best that you guys have, you have the label that I give you in my community posts of, well, I don't want to say it for JStream, but you know how I refer to the Orientals. So this is their argument. I kid you not, this is their argument. They say something to the effect, I mean, they do their quote mining as usual, but this is basically the crux of it. They say, through which the person, prosopon, of each is made to lie in a peculiar hypostasis.
It's hard to put into words the horrors that we've witnessed.
You told me to go on incognito.
The fact that they say the prosopon lies in the hypostasis, therefore they are not the same thing. And they try to then back this up and they say, well, if they're the same thing, then let's just substitute one of those terms back into the sentence and see how nonsensical it sounds to say,
Valid argument.
Through which the person of each is made to lie in a peculiar person, or through which the hypostasis of each is made to lie in a peculiar hypostasis. You see how nonsensical that sounds? So therefore,
no, pause. No, that isn't nonsensical. That's a very good argument. Cyril says in his Thesaurus and in his dialogues on the Trinity, and the Cappadocians say this in letter 210 and letter 214. And you can find this many places throughout all the fathers. You can find this even in as far back as Eusebius of Caesarea. You can find this everywhere. You can find this even in the Latin West. They say that the person lies in the hypostases. The hypostases has the person. If these two things, hypostasis and person, mean the same thing, then substitute them. If they're identical, then you can apply substitutivity. If you do that, it sounds ridiculous to say the person lies in the person. We have to confess the hypostasis lies in the hypostasis. That's unintelligible. That's a good argument. If it's unintelligible, then they can't be the same word. Let's continue.
You can't just say the same, you can't just make substitutions and say that you're talking about the same ontology.
And for those that are curious, we went into the metaphysical distinctions in some of the first couple installments in the series. So you'll need to go back and pay attention to some of that metaphysical discourse that we laid out early on.
Yeah. So what the Orientals, what they don't actually understand, like they're trying, but this is like, honestly, like the IQs of Salafis trying to do metaphysics. Like they're trying, but you have to understand during this time that the Cappadocians are writing, that St. Cyril is writing, this is where you have terms being used inconsistently across the board with just about everybody, and everyone's having difficulty trying to.
Here's his refutation. In letter 210, letter 214, in St. Cyril's dialogues on the Trinity and his Thesaurus, when they say it is ridiculous to have a hypostasis, a person that doesn't lie in a hypostasis, the only reason why those terms are distinct is because the fathers didn't know what they're talking about. Words were confused, guys. That's the real answer. It's not that the Oriental Orthodox have been right, and you should read the fathers as if they know what they're talking about. You should rather presuppose and assume they were confused on the words. That's the real reason. So that's why the Orientals are ridiculous. They don't know that historical context, apparently, that words were all over the place. So that's why they say that the person lies in the hypostases. It's not actually that the Oriental Orthodox are right and person is a distinct term from hypostases. It's rather that words, you know how words are. Let's continue.
Understand what everybody else is saying. When you say hypostasis, are you talking about the nature? Are you talking about the essence? Are you talking about, like, what are you talking about here? And so you will often find in St. Cyril, he will qualify his terms and say one term and then follow it up with another term so that he kind of helps narrow down what exactly he's trying to say, or he will rephrase something using a different term to help you try and understand it. And likewise, the Cappadocians do something similar.
Pause right here. Is that really your amazing lawyering? Is that your refutation? Oh, he was just trying to boil down the words. That's why he used prosopon as a distinct word from hypostasis. He's just trying to boil down. My friend, he said that in the same clause. That's one statement. The person lies in the hypostasis. That's a single statement. He didn't say this, period, that. No, it's one clause.
Mind you, the Greek for these quotes from the Cappadocian fathers, and I think Cyril as well, the Greek is in hypostasis, in hypostasized. So when they say the person subsists in a real hypostasis, the word subsists is not there. It's what's assumed by the fact that they say in hypostasized. And so if now you're gonna say that prosopon is the same as hypostasis, and they're just making just some random distinction. If that is the case, then how is it in hypostasized? By your logic, nature is the same as hypostasis because nature is in hypostasized in your view. So if you can't uphold that distinction for the person and hypostasis and the fathers, then how are you upholding it for yourself?
Right. Here's what Basil says in letter 210. For merely to enumerate the differences of persons is insufficient. We must confess each person to have a substantial existence in real hypostases. Let's do the substitution rule. Let's just say hypostasis means person and reread that quote. For merely to enumerate the differences of persons is insufficient. We must confess each person to have a real existence in a real person. Wow. Makes so much sense when they're the same word. Do you see why this isn't a ridiculous argument to make? Let's continue.
It exists in his orations. He will say hypostasis or person. You choose whichever term you want to use. Like, he's explicit in that respect. Okay, he's very clear. But what the Cappadocians are talking about here is they're talking about don't get caught up in the modalist heresy. So when you are talking about persons and hypostases,
pause right here. Pause right here. What did the modalists teach? What was their heresy? I can't tell me. What was the heresy of the modalists in metaphysical terms?
The modalists, they believed in 3 persons for the one hypostasis. They were the ones that taught that the 3 hypostases were not hypostatized.
So if they mean the same term, then why on earth would they say there's 1 of that and 3 of that if the term means the same thing twice? Refuting the modalists is our point. The modalists believe there's 3 persons with 1 hypostasis. So the Cappadocians, I recommend you read these letters. I'm going to say it one more time. Letter 210, letter 214. The Cappadocians' argument is that modalism is ridiculous. You can't merely say 3 persons. You need to give 3 hypostases to those 3 persons. The 3 hypostases need to have their own person. You can't have 1 hypostasis with 3 persons. That's the refutation. They're presupposing the words are already distinct and saying it's absurd to merely have 3 persons in the Trinity. Isn't that what they believe, though? If the terms are identical, that there's 3 persons? Why does he say enumerate the difference of persons is insufficient if he enumerates the difference of persons, according to your view, if that's what the hypostases are? Why is he adding that further qualification if the words are identical? We can actually explain why it seems that person and hypostasis are substitutable. It's because we know what metaphysics they're employing. They're saying the person lies in the hypostasis. It's n-hypostatic. So the person is a subsistent one. That's what you find in the Paulinus and Meletian issue. And they had the same issue, whether to say 1 hypostasis and 3 persons. These were Trinitarians now, not modalists, saying the same words as the modalists, but in a Trinitarian way. They were saying there's 1 hypostasis, 3 persons. That was the Paulinus group. Pope Damasus agreed with that. Jerome agrees with that in letter 15. And then the Meletian view, where there's 3 hypostases, each have their own personhood. And you know what Athanasius said? Athanasius said the 1 hypostasis, 3 person group is not merely being modalist. They're saying they are subsistent persons. They are persons with a caveat, a substantial thing in them. Athanasius even uses the word en-hypostaton. The persons have hypostases. And then the Meletian view, when they say 3 hypostases and 3 persons, they're not saying 3 substances. They're saying there's 3 individual markings for those 3 persons. Do you see why you need those terms to be distinct? To make sense of the semi-Arian issues, to make sense of the Meletian schism, to make sense of why the modalists are heretics? Do you see why you need the distinction of those words? If the words meant the same thing, we have no idea what they're talking about. Let's continue.
Theology to say 1 hypostasis, but 3 persons, or to say like 3 essences, 3 hypostases. Like, how are you going to be using your terminology? And so basically what the Cappadocians are saying in a quote like this that St. Cyril follows in the Cappadocians, he's identifying that the person, when you're talking about the person lying in the hypostasis, it's referring to the same ontology. You're not attributing this person to a different hypostasis. You're not identifying this hypostasis.
Pause right here. Pause right here. He just once again appealed to a distinction. You're not attributing this person to that hypostasis. You're attributing it to this one. So he's already acknowledging a distinction in the same breath while he's trying to say that it's identical terms. I agree. Fundamentally, an n-hypostatic person is one ontology. No, once again, the person isn't just floating somewhere and the hypostasis is something else, and that's why they're distinct terms. No, they're definitionally distinct terms, but a person that has a hypostasis is one and the same. It's an n-hypostatic prosopon.
And I'll prove this right now. I have a book up right now, the Ancient Christian Texts, Commentary on John by St. Cyril of Alexandria, Volume 1, translated by David Maxwell, edited by Joel C. whatever that name is. Let's see what he says. So this is page 14. Page 14 of the commentary of Saint Cyril on the Gospel of John, Volume 1, by the Ancient Christian Text Series. It says, he has the spirit of the one who begot him, a good of his own nature, living and hypostatic, just as the Father has. Now, the word hypostatic has a footnote on it. Footnote 59. What does it say? Cyril here uses the word in hypostasis, in hypostaton. Cyril here uses the word in hypostaton to describe the Spirit. This does not mean the Spirit is in hypostatic in the sense he exists only in the hypostasis of another and has no hypostasis of his own. This is how the term later came to be understood, to be used to describe Christ's human nature. Here, it means that the Spirit exists concretely as his own person. So even the scholar, the one who's translating St. Cyril of Alexandria, he explains that how the word in hypostasis that you guys now use to mean that the human nature doesn't have a hypostasis of its own, historically it was used to mean that that anything that's in hypostatic has its own hypostasis. And so the persons, for the person to be in hypostatic, the prefix in, that means it has its own hypostasis. So there is a difference. And if you're going to say that the term in hypostasis doesn't prove a difference, then you'd have to say the same for the nature and hypostasis that you use.
Right. So the Son's person has a hypostasis. It's n-hypostatic. The Father's person has a hypostasis. It's n-hypostatic. The Holy Spirit's person has a hypostasis. It's n-hypostatic. What the modalists were saying was that the person of the Father did not have its own hypostasis. The person of the Son did not have its own hypostasis. The person of the Spirit did not have its own hypostasis, because the term verbatim just means appearance. So the fathers are saying there aren't just three appearances in the Trinity. The three persons, the three masks, the three appearances have their own hypostases. That's why the terms are distinct. But person isn't its own separate category of metaphysical ontology. And that's not what we're saying. We're saying that a person is a mask. If it has an ontology, it will be a hypostasis. That's what we're saying. That's why we call it an n-hypostatic person. That's why you can say three persons in the Trinity loosely, because we already know what we're signifying. We're signifying persons that have hypostatic ontology. Let's continue.
So that the person is bound up to the hypostasis, not like you have this hypostasis with a little slot that you then put the person inside it. Because you know how we know
We never said that.
Even on the Oriental paradigm?
We've never said that.
What's funny is that's how they treat in hypostaton. They take the slot of the hypostasis, the divine hypostasis, and they just stuff the human nature in it. Particularize the human nature in it.
Yeah, literally.
Because the person is your unifying ontology of your two hypostases, divine and human, and you are giving me this quote to refute me, and you're saying that the person lies in the hypostasis. So are you telling me then that
the Trinity?
Yeah, right, the Trinity. So then where does human nature be?
Nobody is appealing to Assyrian Church of the East metaphysics here. You made a stream called Refuting Oriental Orthodoxy. Our unifying principle isn't a prosopic union. We don't believe in a prosopic union between two hypostases. We believe in a hypostatic union between two hypostases, a natural union between the two natures. The two become one in the category of what they are. It's not two hypostases unite in one person. It's two hypostases unite in one hypostasis, and this one hypostasis has a prosopon. The prosopon lies in that hypostasis because it has its own individual existence. So it can be picked out with an onomata, a name, an appearance, a character. Let's continue.
Subsumed? Is it being subsumed by the hypostasis itself because the person is in the hypostasis? Like, you don't see how your whole entire metaphysics is breaking down. It makes no sense, never to mind like how it impacts your Trinity. But that was just a side point. I mean, it's like, I love that you guys are actually writing these responses. I really, really do, because it's allowing us to showcase the level of your stupidity. Just keep them coming. Keep those quotes coming.
By the way, pause right here.
Pause right here.
I didn't even write the article he's angry about. I've been doing the streams. I'd love for you to respond to the streams. All of a sudden, you want to respond to someone else's article. By the way, the guy who wrote that article, from what I'm hearing so far, this was a very good article. He did use the proper citations to prove this exact principle that we're arguing for. Let's keep going.
all the articles that we're pushing, and other stuff that we have down the line. It's really going to settle this issue once and for all. So yes, please do refute me or attempt to refute me. But besides that, the other thing that I wanted to get into was one particular topic that I was starting to talk about in my recent Substack articles that is relevant to composite hypostases. And it's actually going to be talked about a little bit more detail in a future part where I have it specifically set out for the Oriental metaphysics. And this is that essentially, for those of you guys who want more technical terminology, because you consume the Oriental stuff and all they're doing is they're just giving you quote mines and just word salad. They're not actually giving you stuff substantively to understand what is it metaphysically that they're trying to do with their system. And they are essentially, their paradigm is essentially Apollinarianism. Now they're going to say it's not, and they're going to say this and that and whatever. And they will say, yes, we disagree with the Apollinarian heresy. We reject this, we reject that. But at the crux of how they look at common and particulars metaphysically, it is essentially Apollinarianism. And it is Apollinarianism because they take nature and hypostasis to both be metaphysically particular. And the funny thing here is the Apollinarians, they make it an explicit point to deny consubstantiality of Christ with Father and humanity. They say,
hold on. Who is the guy who on the past stream said, one incarnate nature of the word, divine only? You guys remember who said that? Because it wasn't me. It was you, Kai. You're the one who's Apollinarian. You're the one who's saying, even after the incarnation, your God is divine only. Talk about Apollinarianism. And now he's going to try and make the argument that we're nominalists. Kairos, can you kind of explain what nominalism is and how we use nature in Oriental Orthodoxy?
Yeah, so nominalism is a type of ontological commitment. It's basically just saying there only exists in reality real, concrete, particular things. You can only, and there would actually not exist even universal things. You can't even conceptualize these things, right? Nominalism would break down into conceptualism, idealism, so on and so forth. We aren't nominalists. We'd be more along the line of moderate realists, where we take that there is a universal, right? For example, universal human essence, which is a nature, and then there are particular human natures, and the universal human essence is real, but not eminently real like the particular natures. But it's also abstract, so not merely conceptual, but viewed in its compendium of particulars.
Mm-hmm. So simply because we use that word physis, it can signify hypostasis, as Cyril says. Cyril says the nature of the word, that is the word himself. Cyril says that verbatim. Nature of the word, that is the word himself, talking about his hypostasis. Cyril says there's an unconfusion between the two natures or hypostases. Cyril says that. So nature can signify hypostasis, but doesn't solely do that. So Kai's doing a fallacy here. He assumes that because we use a word in one way, we only use it in that way. Or because nominalists also use that word one way, whereas Eastern Orthodox do not. We're closer to the nominalists in the Eastern Orthodox, therefore we must be nominalists. That must be our heresy. That has to be it. Because they don't use nature for hypostases, whereas we do. Nominalists do. So by association, we're nominalists. We're not nominalists. We don't say nature is only for hypostases. In some contexts, nature is applied to hypostases. In some contexts, nature is applied to ousia. That's what we've been saying. Now, someone can argue, well, wouldn't that mean that you guys have three natures in the Trinity? Before I respond to that, how do you not fall in that issue when you're lawyering for the past, 1600 years now? Was when Cyril said one nature, he meant one person. Well, now, when Cyril says one nature, he means one person. Wouldn't that mean there's three persons, three natures in God, using Cyril's definitions? The ones you guys appeal to, not I appeal to. You guys say when Cyril said one nature, he meant one person. Does that not mean there's three natures in God? So that's like showing inconsistency. But the reason why we wouldn't go so far as to say there's three natures in the Trinity is because that term already designates the ultimate numerical unity between them. The ultimate nature is the divine essence. So now to say three natures in the Trinity is to now take that word, and to a listener, they would assume we're using that word in the same way and applying multiplicity where the ousia is. We don't do that. But even pre-schism saints from contemporary to the time of Athanasius and before and after, they say, for example, there's three substances in the Trinity. That's what you have to say when you say three hypostases. Hypo means under, stasis means standing. Sub means under, stantia means standing. So the Latin West, some fathers say there's three substances in God. Even Alexander, Saint Alexander of Alexandria, he says the nature of the Son is distinct from the nature of the Father, And then in another paragraph, he says they have the same nature, meaning he's applying nature to the usia of God. But in another sense, and I don't recommend you do this because it'll cause confusion, he'll say the nature of the Father is distinct from the nature of the only begotten. So, Kai, you can't just say we're nominalists because we use nature the way that the fathers did. That nature can pick out hypostases. Like, do you not understand? For centuries, that's what your saints have been doing to argue why Cyril said one nature. They say that when Cyril said one nature, he said he meant it as one person. Why aren't you accusing Cyril of nominalism? Why? I don't get it. Please, someone point it out. Why isn't Cyril a nominalist, but we are for doing the same move? Let's keep going.
Have perfect consubstantiality. And the way that they
with
ensure
perfect, they deny perfect.
so the Apollinarians, they deny perfect consubstantiality of Christ with the Father and with us in humanity. They mandate that the divine human Christ, he has to be different, because for them,
pause right here.
being
I know for sure the Apollinarians denied. They affirmed a consubstantiality between the Word and the flesh. iKan, are you aware of them rejecting consubstantiality between Word and the Father? I don't know. I'm genuinely curious.
The Apollinarians, no.
Yeah,
The
that's what I
Apollinarians
was
were
thinking.
simply Trinitarians. Even Jerome mentions
Yeah.
one of the good contributions of Apollinarius was his defense of the Holy Trinity. To an extent.
That's what I'm understanding. I know he had consubstantiality between Word and the flesh. Everyone knows that.
Right.
But I remember distinctly he affirmed consubstantiality between Father and Son. So, and I don't like to be that guy and say, look, he made one mistake, therefore his whole what he's about to say is mistaken. But I think we should start learning from history. This is our 4th stream so far. Let's keep going.
Is to divide Christ. The Apollinarians said that if we count 2, and if we say that there's this double homoousios, then you have a divided Christ. And
pause right here.
Their whole
saying Gregory the theologian cites some verbatim saying 2 natures. Verbatim in letter 102. He says they accuse us of introducing 2 natures, separated or struggling, and dividing the surpassing henosis. They ought not do that which they accuse us, and they not accuse us of that which they do. So Gregory theologian says they affirm 2 natures in Christ. They were, if we're going to use that word diophysis as it's found in letter 102, they did use that phrase. They just applied a consubstantiality between those 2 natures, which is a big difference. Let's keep going.
This paradigm rests on denying consubstantiality in order to not say that there are 2 Christs, to preserve a singular Christ, a singular ontology. And the move that they do to ensure this is to say that nature and hypostasis both are metaphysical particulars. And that's
pause right here.
Have that.
Do you have a source, Kai? Because last I checked, we don't have that much of Apollinarius' works, if any. The only thing you have is from Leontius of Jerusalem's against the Monophysites, Leontius of Byzantium's against the frauds of the Apollinarians, Maximus throughout his corpus, the Doctrina Patrum, Justinian. These guys are all interreliant, with the first references being Leontius. Where are you getting your history of Apollinarius? Have you ever thought of that? Why do you only know your history from Apollinarians, from guys who post-date the Miaphysite-Diophysite schism? Is that not something to be suspecting? Why should we take your word that it was actually the Apollinarians who agreed with us the whole time? Why should I trust that? I don't trust you. Where are you getting your history from? I thought you wanted to keep this raw metaphysics. Doesn't look like it anymore. Now you're appealing to history, but it's history as it's told by the Chalcedonians. So you have a Chalcedonian telling you the history of the Apollinarians, which he got from Chalcedonians. And there's just no other independent attestation before the Leontia. And I've made this clear on multiple of my streams. That like the whole Apollinarian forgery hypothesis, even with the citations of the Apollinarians, it comes from forgers who are Chalcedonian. It comes from the Leontii. Let's keep going.
This phrase that they say, one incarnate nature, one hypostasis, one person, just one across the board, and you never say 2.
Right. So this is why it ends up in the John Philoponus tritheism error, right? Because every hypostasis is just simply an individualized nature. So is this basically a nominalist move that there are no universals?
Correct. This is one.
What's evidence? Pause right here. What's the evidence we deny universals? What's the evidence? Why can't we use nature as hypostases in some contexts and nature as ousia in others? Why is using nature as hypostases going to mean it's solely that? What's the argument for that? Just because it sounds associated?
Yeah, and on top of that, even they would have to admit to some extent that they still use it this way. At least I know for sure in the Latin West, it's still used in this way to some extent for the term substance. Why? because the term substance is used in the Eucharist and it does not mean essence. It means hypostasis. But we also know that substance is also used in other contexts as essence, and for the most part, substance is used as essence. And so now he might say that's the Latins, not the Eastern Orthodox, but of course they would have to admit that as Eastern Orthodox, many of their at least recent fathers do use the term transubstantiation. Now they could say that it's metaphorical, whatever. I understand, but transubstantiation, you're still using that the term substance is being used as hypostasis here, and in other contexts it would mean essence. So, and it's really dishonest because he asked them, is nature individual or universal? What is united? Historically, they used to usually focus on it being common or universal natures, but today, for the most part, they admit that it is an individual nature. So they themselves have.
Your mic cut out. Yeah, I know Damascene and Maximus make it clear nature can't even be used for particulars. So now are they nominalists? How do you know we're nominalists? How do you know we deny ousia? What's your evidence for that?
They want to give this image of consistency for them, but it's honestly a facade, because once you get past the face value layer, there's no deeper consistency. There are many other things where they're not consistent on it in terminology, and even the most obvious example, they keep bringing up this reflection of economia and theologia in terms of terminology, but they wouldn't concede this for the term processions, for the term proceeds. They respond to the Roman Catholics that proceed means something different in economia than theologia.
Imagine if tridology was completely reflexive with talking about created categories. I have one ousia with iKan and Kairos, but there's one ousia in God. So if we're just going to make them totally reflexive, that the ousia of God, we're just going to forget the nuance that it has numerical unity. And the ousia of man, we're going to forget the nuance that it only has a formal unity. If we forget that nuance and just do total reflexivity, you either have tritheism, the way me and you are three men on this panel, or you're going to run into a mono-humanity issue, because there's one ousia in God and the terms are reflexive. There's one ousia in man, and there's one man. You see how really ridiculous that is? Really ridiculous.
Yeah, most people they'll take this idea that you just spoke about, reflexivity with monohumanity or tritheism, and they'll justify it by speaking of Saint Gregory of Nyssa. But the whole point is that Saint Gregory of Nyssa expresses how it's analogous, but not one-to-one. There has to be qualifications, numerical unity, formal unity, the type of oneness, type of identity, all so on and so forth, and how we speak of nature.
Which Nyssa does, right? Nyssa says that in Adablabium, what you're talking about. He says the anthropon in them is one, but we have to call them many men because they have different activities. Well, isn't the whole Neo-Chalcedonian defense of dioenergism that energy and activity is essential? Why is it that we have different activities if we all have one human ousia? What happened to that reflexivity? It doesn't work.
Right, and even Polemos, there's a quote of him where Polemos explains, Gregory Polemos that is, he explains that the unity of energy in creation is merely a unity of likeness or species. It is not a unity of actual activity. It's not.
Which requires
it's not really
instantiation.
Right. It's not really one energy in the same way that the Trinity's energy is one, because the Trinity has a real unity.
Yeah. Let's keep going.
Physics Prime, in my very first article that I wrote, I basically said it. John Philoponus is not doing anything different in the Oriental scheme than Severus. He's just saying what Severus doesn't want to say. But the paradigm itself logically leads to what John Philoponus said explicitly. He's just taking Severus to his logical conclusion, and it's basically not, that is.
Pause right here. iKan. Why did Philoponus become nominalist and Severus didn't? What shifted there?
Because Philoponus was first and foremost a philosopher, an Aristotelian philosopher. And as most people know, or actually no, it's the opposite. As most people don't know, there's not one unique interpretation of Aristotle, of Plato, or of many others. For example, the idea today is to say that Aristotle and Plato are two different schools, they're two different thinkers, they're two different ideologies, and they're not reconcilable. There's a Platonists and there's Aristotelians. These are two different schools. But historically, for example, the Neoplatonists, the school of Neoplatonism, it believed that Aristotle and Plato were reconcilable. They could be read in light of one another, and were both correct on most topics. And so Philoponus, he basically was what's called a proto-nominalist, because obviously nominalism, the whole concept and idea, was developed much later by Occam, but a concept of it was made by Philoponus and him interpreting Aristotle. And so Philoponus is probably the reason that John of Damascus says that we believe that that we believe that Aristotle is our 13th apostle. This is an accusation he makes against us. And so in his philosophy and strict Aristotelianism, he made up his own concept on universals. And then the issue is that Philoponus, he doesn't see philosophy and theology as two different things, which to an extent is true. It's true to an extent in that philosophy is the love of wisdom and theology is the love of God. So they're similar in that respect. But in terms of secular philosophy and reliance on secular philosophers, Philoponus took that and he understood it as a real philosophy, and he combined it with his understanding of theology, which led him to applying his nominalism to the Trinity. For example, William of Ockham, the guy who actually invented nominalism, he even though he denies universals, he doesn't apply this to the Trinity. He believes that divine essence is real, which is probably why he wasn't at least highly condemned in the Catholic Church as a major heretic or something. But this is Philoponus's issue, and that's where the tritheist heretics came out of.
Yeah. There's something good you can recognize with Philoponus. He is relying on philosophy hardline, like completely. So if even he got that far in justifying meophysitism, gives it some logical precedence, right? It's a little bit hard to prove meophysitism wrong if you take some Aristotelian principles as true. The difference between Severus is relying on the fathers who baptized those Aristotelian principles. So that's why they have that shared meophysite understanding, right? But they get it from different sources. Philoponus is getting it from the hard philosophers. So that's where he gets his sharp type token understanding and then has to apply it to God and has that form of proto-nominalism. Severus is taking something already baptized in the church. His sources are Cyril and the Cappadocians. So their association of being meophysites is only because meophysitism is logically true. Their disassociation, where they differ, is because of what they take as sources. That's why you can't say, oh, Philoponus is just Severus who was honest, right? That's completely foolish. Like, this is like me finding an Nestorius or something. And I was saying Nestorius is Maximus if Nestorius took the logical conclusions. Why? Both affirm two natures, right? Both affirm two essences. Both affirm there's one Christ, one Son, one Lord. Simply finding that association is not going to make me say they both have the exact same metaphysical presuppositions. Let's keep going.
Exactly what it is nominalism. And so then what ends up happening here is,
to stay ahead of the competition, you need
the Apollinarians, and you can read it there. St. Justinian, he quotes it in his book On the Person of Christ. He's quoting one of the Apollinarians, which is very interesting because the Apollinarians say, he's like, how can you guys follow this formula, the one incarnate nature, or the one nature of the Logos incarnate, however you want to phrase it. He's saying, how can you guys follow this formula when it was our father Apollinaris who gave us this formula specifically to avoid two natures? But now this is very interesting, is that the Apollinarians themselves, they say something very interesting. They're saying is the Cappadocians, and they name the two Gregories, they name St. Athanasius explicitly, and they say, these guys teach two natures. So how is it that you guys are teaching two natures but subscribe to this formula that Apollinaris gave us specifically against two natures? So one, this is telling us so that we as Orthodox, we're actually reading the fathers correctly when we're quoting them for two natures, right? So the Apollinarians are actually siding with us against the Orientals and saying, yeah, you guys are reading the fathers, the Cappadocians, when they're talking about two natures, you have them right.
Pause right here. Pause right here. Conveniently, for the first time in human history, in the 6th century, they magically found quotes where the Apollinarian said my father Apollinarius, it would be a student, basically. They're citing a student of Apollinarius. My father, Apollinarius, invented mia physis to logos esarkomeni to combat Athanasius, who taught two natures. Then they just magically, conveniently found that quote after Chalcedon. Conveniently, in the 6th century, Justinian got it from Leontius. He himself cited Justinian as his source. Why would I trust that quote? Why? Where was it? Where was it? Why is the first place this citation is found is in a guy whose scholarship says falsifies quotes? He makes them up out of nothing with zero independent attestation. iKan, please help me out. Do you remember that one story, if you can share it, where Leontius got the wrong Timothy?
The wrong Timothy?
Remember where he wanted to cite Timothy, but Severus would have been too young at that point for him to have actually cited the correct Timothy.
Yeah, so there's a point of Leontius of Jerusalem in his On the Testimonies of the Saints, where he's making an argument that we basically are wrong by citing Saint Timothy Aelurus. Saint Timothy, he's often nicknamed the cat. He's the second Timothy of Alexandria, and so he has this quote of him where he's basically like, yeah, even if Cyril did teach two natures, but he was corrected, thankfully, by Severus. Now, mind you, Pope Timothy II, he died in 477 AD. Saint Severus was born in the year, what was it? Do you remember, Agen?
No. But when you get to the
It was the year
punchline.
465 AD. 465 AD. So 477 minus 465. Saint Severus was 12 years old when Saint Timothy died. So as a 12-year-old, assuming that Timothy allegedly wrote this at the very last minute of his life, he's on his deathbed. He decides, you know what? Let me ruin the future of my church. Let me talk about how Cyril was actually Diophysite. I've been spending my entire life arguing he's Miaphysite, but now I'm going to say he's Diophysite, and that he's going to be corrected by the 12-year-old who taught Miaphysitism.
This is what we're dealing with. Leontius magically finds these quotes no one has ever seen before, magically saying exactly what the Chalcedonians want. Oh, who could have guessed? Who could have guessed? Let's keep going.
Just to see how bad of a user of quotes he is, at one point he cites Saint Cyril of Alexandria to prove two natures, and then the footnote by Patrick Gray says this is actually from Severus of Antioch. He's the one that said.
Let's keep going.
We oppose them. So thank you, Apollinarians, for clarifying that. So whenever
thank you, Leontius.
This whole mia physis and denying that the Father speak of two natures and this and that. Well, the Apollinarians themselves say, yeah, you guys are speaking of two natures.
Well, also too, that Apollinaris is the originator of the Logos Sarx Christology, which shows that it's not really issues of the terminology that's the main problem. I mean, words and terminology can be a problem, but there's an orthodox way to read the Logos Sarx Christology that originates in Apollinaris, which is very helpful for explaining the asymmetrical Christology versus symmetrical. Yep. That shows that that's why you can't solve this issue by quote mines, because a lot of these words can be, or ideas or concepts can be used in different ways. And also Apollinaris shows that there is a nature person distinction in anthropology in the church fathers as well, because some of the people who argue against us will argue that not only is there not really a nature person distinction in the Trinity, it doesn't exist in Christology, and it also doesn't exist in human anthropology. So for example, the Latinizers who want to argue that everyone is guilty in Adam, they're not even understanding that their root mistake is the failure to make a distinction between nature and person in humans, and to distinguish what's proper to nature versus what's proper to the mode of willing, which is personal. So there's no way that it even makes sense to talk about guilt by nature or natural guilt.
Pause right here. This is common Jay Dyer tactic. Word salad, tie it into another topic I know because I don't know this topic. You see, you need a person-nature distinction. Otherwise, it's going to collapse in absolute divine simplicity, right? The Thomists say person and nature are identical in God. You need the person-nature distinction. The Augustinians, even in the Orthodox Church, they want to teach original sin. So they say they don't have a nature-person distinction because they say we sinned in Adam. We naturally sinned. So you have the guilt. Guilt is personal. Dude, where are you getting your sources for Apollinarius? Where did you get it from? Talking about we don't do quote mines, but he's citing a historical figure. Where did you get it from? I'll tell you where you got it from. You got your understanding of Apollinarius from Chalcedonian forgers. Leontius of Jerusalem, Leontius of Byzantium, Justinian relying on them, Maximus relying on them, Doctrine of Patrum relying on them, and then a guy, what's his name again? If you remember iKan, that one scholar the German guy who wrote that thesis using Leontius of Byzantium on the Apollinarian forgery.
Leitzman.
Yes. Hans van Leitzman. Yes, that's where you're getting it from. Or what's his name? It's not Hans.
Yeah, it's Hans Leitzman.
It's Hans? Okay. All right, let's keep going.
Is personal. So you have to make these distinctions or else you're going to end up in some stupid heresy and you don't even realize it. And that's why Losky is one of the key, I think, insights. If you read his books, when he talks about Apollinaris, he makes this very point that Apollinaris' mistake was actually to not make the nature-person distinction in Christ and in human nature, because he replaces a trait of nature or property of nature for the person or the subject. So this notion of personal theology or a personal ontology, the subject agent Christology, is once again crucial here, because the move that Apollinaris is making is to fend off a legitimate problem. But the problem is that he goes into the opposite extreme of thinking that the reasoning is what is the.
Where did you get the idea Apollinarius made moves? What historical sources are you citing here? What moves did he make? I'd love to see them. We barely have anything from Apollinarius. Where are you getting this from? Just because it sounds cool and smart? Let's keep going.
The person. And you see this in William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig today literally has the same position as Apollinaris. And so just like with the Monophysites going off in their heterodox error, William Lane Craig repeats and goes off in the same heterodox error. Why? Because he thinks of personhood as a trait of nature, namely the rational faculty, the reasoning faculty. And that's exactly what Apollinaris did. So the church's rejection of Apollinaris at Constantinople I is already the excommunicating of this stupid metaphysical mistake that you see the Orientals making, as well as Kai's pointing out.
Bro, Jay Dyer is getting so much money off of us right now. All this ad revenue.
I want to add on to this, and then I'll just flip back over to David. The idea here now, this whole tertium quid argument, and the Orientals, they think that they've answered this, that they provided a solution that avoids the whole tertium quid. And I'm sorry to tell you, but no, you haven't. Okay, I've heard your responses to the tertium quid argument, and it's absolutely idiotic, and it just showcases you don't actually understand the paradigm that you follow. You want to profess something, and you think that merely professing it means that your metaphysical paradigm doesn't lead to it. Well, it actually does. And so when you look at the consequences of taking both nature and hypostasis as metaphysical particulars,
pause right here,
and you want to combine them.
Here's the grandiose thesis. I've heard your guys' refutations. Yeah, I don't like them. You think that you can just say there's no tertium quid, but trust me, there's a tertium quid. Trust me. You just got to take my word. I've heard your arguments. They're not good. Take my word for it. I'm going to run you down again, the argument, Kai. Let me show it to you. Very simple. Tertium quid results under these circumstances, always. I'll give an analogy. It's when, for example, two things of the same layer of reality require something led to them both fighting some space, and because they are both of the same material reality, they can't inhabit it at the same time without contradiction. For example, milk and orange juice, right? I'm gonna put them in one cup. Reality, because of the laws of physics, forces them to be in that one cup, right? I can't pour it in a cup and then it falls from the ceiling, right? It's going to be subject to that location. So because they're from the same layer of reality, here's what has to happen. Either A, one annihilates the other, the milk annihilates the orange juice, or the orange juice annihilates the milk, or they both have to make a decision, they're using decision here loosely, where they need to compromise. So they're going to find a middle position. This applies with contraries. Contraries can have tertium quids. For example, cold and hot. If something led for them to fight, right, they need to be in the same place, in the same sense. They're going to compromise. They're going to meet in the middle, right? Partly cold, partly hot. It's not actually cold, it's not actually hot, it's in the middle. It's warm. Black and white. If I have black and white paint, these are contraries. They need to be on the same, let's say, piece of paper, the exact same location. They're going to compromise. They're going to meet in the middle. Gray. Now, when we're talking about the divinity and the humanity, these aren't contraries. These are contradictories. So even if they wanted to do a tertium quid, it would be impossible. It's an impossibility. There's no middle position. The properties of the divinity and the properties of humanity are P and not P. Affirmation and negation. They're not contraries, they're contradictories. Their opposition doesn't have a middle. This is what's called law of excluded middle. It's only these two options. There's no middle position. So they couldn't compromise if they want to. So if there's a numerical oneness, both have to remain. The predicates both have to remain. And especially because they're from different layers of reality, they don't meet that kind of conflict, right? The divinity isn't subject to location. The humanity is. So what are they fighting over? What's there to fight over? They compose a thing. And this one thing has the predicates of both. And we see this in analogies even here, where things are from different layers of reality. We actually do find oneness without confusion. For example, my body is divisible. My soul is indivisible. The two unite. I am an indivisible and divisible subject. That is who I am. Heat and fire. Heat is of its own layer of reality. Or sorry, heat and iron. Heat is of its own layer of reality. Iron is its own layer of reality. When they come together, they don't have to fight over anything because they're of different layers of reality. So I can have a heated iron. There's no tertium quid here. So tertium quid can only apply between contraries of the same layer of reality. That's the rule. You're welcome to refute my rule, but you have to refute it. I know you don't like to do that, Kai. But this is my rule. For tertium quids, contraries of the same layer of reality. In the incarnation, they are neither contraries nor are they of the same layer of reality.
Yep. And the real crux of the issue where this mindset comes from is the fact that in their own perspective, unity, they cannot conceive of unity without sameness, and they cannot conceive of a distinction without duality. And I'll prove this with a simple point. Any distinction for them is duality. They say that. They say two natures. They say distinction in the nature, two natures. And so what obviously that would lead to is that any unity will be a sameness. Now, what is mixture? Mixture is the loss of the integrity of the things that were united. Or confusion is a loss of, the whole idea is losing the integrity, losing what it is. Now, if they become the same exact thing as one another, then that means there's a mixture. So, for example, let's say the two natures become united and they become one and the same nature. Not by being united as one composite nature, but as one and the same simple nature in terms of the natural unity. If that were the case, you guys would obviously say that's a tertium quid. That's heretical. That's a mixture. That's a confusion. Blah 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 blah. And I agree. Now, by your own logic, the hypostasis is it different between the two natures or not? It's not. You're gonna say it's not different. You're gonna say it's a simple hypostasis in terms of hypostatic. And the hypostaticness, it is simple, not composite. If that is the case, then you're conceding a hypostatic mixture.
Right.
You are the ones that teach a tertium quid in terms of the hypostases.
Right, which Maximus says. There's no hypostatic distinction in the logos and the flesh. They are hypostatically identical and essentially distinct. And that's why there's two natures but one hypostasis. That's Maximus's argument. You can read about that in letter 15 of his. Let's keep it going. Let's try and make it like 1.8 speed, Kairos, and let's let it play for like 15 minutes, because the last like 30 minutes or so is them responding to super chats and stuff, which we could briefly go quickly.
In some way.
Let's play.
So you have basically two options here. If you let them to mix or you don't let them to mix. So if you don't let them to mix, then you have Nestorianism. You've got two metaphysically particular natures, and you have two metaphysically particular hypostases, and they remain. And that is Nestorianism. They persist in whatever union you want to try to put them together under. But then the other side here is you have to remember that according to the Oriental paradigm, when you say that Christ is one incarnate nature, that he's one nature, that has to be a metaphysical particular. It's not common. It's not just a label. It is metaphysically particular. And so when you have two particulars come together and you're saying they are forming one particular, then that is your tertium quid. That is some kind of divine human hybrid. But now they're going to try to get out of this, and they're going to say, well, no, hold on a second. What we mean is that there's this inseparability, and we can contemplate the differences of the particularities in theoria. They're like, so all the properties are there, but they're inseparable. And so this kind of like
Pause right here.
Is what we're...
Pause right here. Let's say the logical conclusion of our position is a hybrid. Can you give me an example of a divine human hybrid? Because my whole argument is it's impossible, even if you wanted it to be the case. Let's take any two predicates, created and uncreated. What's the hybrid between them? Nothing. You can't be partly created, partly uncreated in the same sense. That's impossible. Those predicates remain too. But because we affirm a natural oneness, we can have that natural oneness with diverse sets of characteristics. And if there's diverse sets of characteristics, then there's no confusion. How can you have a hybrid of when there's created, uncreated, and there's an excluded middle? Let's keep going.
Counting as one. So it's like if you think that you have a set, and so you have the divine set, you have the human set, and you're just kind of putting them together and you're just calling this new spectrum, this continuum, as one whole set. And that is your one nature that is completely undivided, but you can still see the differences and the particularities. That does not
Pause right here. Kairos. Do we believe that the one nature is a set of properties that is divine and human?
No, we don't believe there's one mere set of properties of divine and human.
Right. So elaborate on our position. What exactly is our position? What are sets of properties? And I think we should take this time. I know you wanted to leave the whole bundle theory, but maybe we should introduce it and then elaborate on it later on. So let's explain what exactly sets of things are briefly.
Yeah, sets of things are just conceptual groupings of whether it be members or predicates, things that can be spoken of. These are merely conceptual, given the ontological commitments. But in our view, we take that sets are merely conceptual. You group these things according to whatever common label you want to give them, but they are not concrete, like, particular natures. So we believe there's one composite nature. You can say that there are two sets of natural properties. One set is the human properties. The human properties. The second set is the divine properties. We group them to be divided in sets so that they don't share one conjoint set of some sort of weird hybrid mixture. And then
which is impossible.
Exactly. And then from there, we go into Entheoria, speaking about, well, where do these sets come from? Prior to the composition, obviously, we speak of the divine hypostases, the human hypostases, and then the natural differences is what allows us to perceive of those two hypostases, but we only viewed in natural differences, hence us grouping those mutually exclusive natural differences into conceptuals or conceptual groupings of sets.
Right. So we get those divine set and human set by locating the formal cause. What is it that made Christ have divine properties and human properties, which I can locate, that have opposition? It's the fact that he is from two natures, from two hypostases. In the mind, it leads me to divide them. And like we argued, formal causes does not always mean distinct subjects of attribution after the union. Has never been the case. There's no way to prove that. And we've never even said the one nature is just a set of divine human properties. The one nature is a subject of attribution, and it has two conceptual sets of attribution. We locate some things are divine, some things are human, and those properties are really not the same properties, but that category, that set, is going to be fashioned because we locate the formal causes. So Kai's argument is just non sequiturs, not even responding to our refutations. We just have to keep repeating them. Let's keep it going for a little bit.
Out of your problem, because your metaphysical particular nature subsists as one nature. That's how it has its subsistence, because you're saying that every hypostasis, it cannot be anhypostatized or anousian, meaning existing without nature. So if you're saying you have only one hypostasis and it must have its own ousia or its own nature corresponding to it, then it has to subsist according to that one nature.
Pause
and
right here.
If you now have this one.
He's making this type of argument. Premise one, and I'm not going to make this all formalized, but to get the gist. Premise one, Orientals say every ousia needs to have a hypostasis, or the vice versa. He'll say it in both different ways in his streams. The hypostasis needs an ousia, and the ousia needs a hypostasis, right? You can't just have an anhypostatic. Premise two, they affirm one particular. And then conclusion, therefore, this one particular needs its own ousia. So Christ needs one ousia. He's confusing homogeneous particulars and heterogeneous particulars. Homogeneous particulars are resultants of instantiation. So we allocate an ousia to it. Heterogeneous particulars are products of composition, not products of instantiation. So you don't give it its own ousia. You don't say, here, this divine human hypostasis has a divine human ousia. Why? Because it's not the same kind of particular as homogeneous particulars. Heterogeneous particulars come to be from unions. Homogeneous particulars come to be from instantiations. Instantiations are what tells me what ousia does this hypostasis have. For example, a mere dog hypostasis has a dog ousia. But when you have one hypostasis from two hypostases, you don't allocate its own ousia. You don't. The only time we do that is in the human case, which even John of Damascus concedes. It's only because, like when we say there's one nature of all creation, right? That's what he means by there's one human ousia. There's not actually a real ousia that is having opposing properties. It's rather the fact that every human is composed of the same things. We're going to give some type of sameness and call that an ousia. It's going to be like a nominalist account for this particular case. So with that in mind, I don't see where Kazi's going to continue with this. I don't get what the argument's going to be. Why do we need to have a divine human usia to have a divine human hypostasis? We're the ones who define our own premises, our own propositions. We define what we mean by a hypostasis requires an usia or an usia requires a hypostasis. You don't define it for us. And we make that sharp distinction between a heterogeneous particular and a homogeneous particular. iKan, you wanted to say something? No? Okay, let's keep it going.
Hypostasis that is particularly existing in such a way, then that means you are breaking consubstantiality with the Father and with humanity, because now Christ's one nature is neither one of them. It doesn't matter that you can pick out these differing particularities, because that's not how the metaphysics works out. And Severus quotes, or not Severus quotes, David quotes Severus, where he's basically saying that when you speak of distinctions, that is a dissolver of unity. So you can't speak of two natures.
And by the way, this was exactly what we've been saying about so many heresies, right? So many heresies. Think of the Thomistic nonsense that if you speak of an essence energy distinction, that necessitates composition and division. The exact same here. To distinguish, they somehow think necessitates division. I don't know why.
Yep. Everybody who really wants to know the details of this, highly recommend. David did I think it's like a 3-hour long stream specifically on Severus, providing the receipts, the quotes where he's talking about distinctions or dissolvers of unity and stuff like that. He's talking about philoxenes of Marburg as well in his paradigm. It's in his Refuting Oriental streams. You need to check this out.
Yes, it's in the playlist. Yeah, he says duality is a dissolver of unity.
Is it called, David? Is it called Severus? I'm trying to pull it up to put it in here. Is it Severus of Antioch's Miaphysite Christology and Context? That was 3 hours.
I think so. Yes, that should be. Yes, that's the updated one from updated the Council 5 years ago. Yeah, that's where I look at Severus, Philoxenes, and other Oriental fathers. And I also okay, did you finish by the way? Or
let's pause and make it brief. Okay. That quote from Severus, that duality is a abolisher of unity. That's a true principle. It would be an abolishment of unity in that specific category. iKan, if you want to briefly touch that.
Yeah, by the way, sorry, something happened. I don't know why I keep getting technical difficulties, but yeah. Covering this topic, as mentioned already, unity is oneness, and there's no going around this. We say God is united. When we say God is united, we're not talking about multiple things coming into unity. Unity means to be one. The very root of the word unity, united, comes from the word unit. The same in Greek. Enosis, comes from the word eno, one. Latin as well. Actually, I forgot the word for unity in Latin, so we'll move past that.
Unitas.
But basically, what was that?
Unitas.
Unitas, yes. Uni comes from uno. In any type of way, for there to be unity, there has to be oneness. When we say God is united and we mean God has unity, we mean God is one. And again, citing the Damascene principle in Contra Jacobitis. If things are united, they are one, but not in every way, but as they are united. So the very sense of unity will always be a sense of oneness. And what that leads to is that duality means there's no unity. Where there's duality
in that category specifically, right?
Yes, we're not strawmanning you guys. We're not saying that, you say two, that means there's no unity whatsoever. What we are saying is that wherever there's two, there's not unity in that same category. You cannot.
So perfect example is Nestorius. Everyone says Nestorius separates, right? He doesn't unite. But it's not that we're strawmanning Nestorius. We're saying he's not uniting that specific category which needs to be united. He affirms a unity, but not a natural one. How do we know that? Because he keeps the natures as two. So duality is an abolisher of unity in that specific category. Even they concede these principles sometimes. For example, why is Christ two usia? Because the two usia don't have an essential unity. They don't have an account of oneness in usia, right? The word and the flesh don't have one usia. They have their own usia. So they're appealing to that same principle. If you have duality in a certain category, it abolishes unity in that category. So Nestorius doesn't have a natural unity. So his duality leads to that abolition of that natural unity. He does have one person, so he has a prosopic unity. So we're not strawmanning Nestorius. We're simply adding that qualification. Duality is an abolisher of unity in that specific category where you're counting two.
Right. And you say essential unity, you're saying one essence. You say hypostatic unity, you're saying one hypostasis. And a question I like to ask is define a union. Define a union. Then they'll say a union is when two things are united. That's a circular definition. It's the same thing as when you ask a a transgender to define a woman, and they say a woman is whoever identifies as a woman. Yeah, you have to define the word unity, and there's no way to define it except one. Look, any classical definition, even the Wikipedia definition, any formal English, Greek, any language, you're gonna find that unity means oneness. And again, we're not strawmanning you. We're not saying that, oh, you say they are united, then you have to affirm one nature. We'd say that you'd have to affirm one nature if you admitted to a natural unity. A natural unity is a unity in the category of nature, which would lead to one nature.
Let's keep that going.
Yeah, I'll add some stuff. So you can finish.
So just to kind of wrap this up, there is it's quite simple. You just simply ask like a simple set of questions. It's to the Orientals. You basically throw them to this. It's like, okay, so I'm actually gonna pull it up. I'll just read through it because of the way that I formulated it. Let me just pull up my article here. So basically, you ask the question: does the Father and Christ have the same nature? Yes. What is that nature? Divine. Does Christ and we, or do Christ and we have the same nature? Yes. What is that nature? Human. So how many natures does Christ have? Okay, you would think that the person with some kind of intelligence is going to say two, right? Because that's obvious that it is two. And when you say that Christ is consubstantial with the Father, that is one nature that you're counting right there. And you're going to have to count that as one nature because the Father and us humans, we don't share the same nature as the Father. Okay, the Father does not have any human nature. So the consubstantiality that Christ has with the Father, that's one nature. And then likewise with the human nature, that's a second nature. So you have.
Let's briefly address this. Good timing. So let's take his argument. Homoousion relations, right? Same essence. The Father has the same essence with the Son. The Son has the same essence with the Father. We don't have the same essence with the Father. Let me reword it better. The Son has the same essence as the Father. The Son has the same essence as us. We don't have the same essence with the Father, and the Father doesn't have the same essence with us. So if he has the same human ousia that's distinct from the same divine ousia, they'll say, well, count, that's two ousia. What he fails to understand, when you apply a same ousia relation, because that's what sameness is, it's a type of relation, it's a count of relation. When you say same ousia, you have to examine the hypostasis which has that ousia. When I say Christ is of one essence with me, I'm saying that his human hypostasis, when we conceive that on its own, has that consubstantial relation. And because he is one from both, he maintains those essential relations. But the reason why it isn't collapsible into two ousia is because the human ousia has only a formal unity. St. Gregory of Nyssa says, the unity of the human ousia is conceivable in the mind alone. So because it's conceivable in the mind alone, I have to locate the particular first to then come to that understanding of the ousia. You have to work upwards. You locate the human hypostases, and then from there you learn about its ousia. So that's why we can have same ousia, same hypostases relations, because he's composed of two hypostases. But for me to even think of the human ousia, you can't just loosely predicate them to the heterogeneous hypostases unqualified. You can only predicate it to Christ when you're examining the particular which is instantiated of that ousia, and that requires a theoretical division to even come to know of that fleshly hypostasis in Christ. So you need to exercise theoretical division to then see the human hypostases, to then locate that formal unity as it's moderately real in that human hypostasis and with others. You see how many steps you have to do before that? So you can't just simply say, homoousios with Father, homoousios with us, the ousios with the Father is one ousia, the ousios with the Son, with us is another ousia, that's two ousias. You first need to locate the hypostasis, which is instantiated of that ousia, and that requires a conceptual division, because as we said, the composite hypostasis isn't instantiated from anything. The composite hypostasis is a union of two hypostases. The divine hypostasis analogically is instantiated. The human hypostasis is analogically instantiated, or literally instantiated for the human case.
Yeah. And just to clarify, it was Gregory the theologian, not Gregory of Nyssa. Narration 31, he says, but in the case of humanity, our common nature has a unity which is conceivable only in thought, and the individuals are very different from one another, for they are divided by time and by the capacity to experience and to act.
Also, one last thing. Given that they don't take any of these steps to, get to the idea of the particulars uniting with the relation of ousia, and also given that they've admitted to being Apollinarians, and then also like weird hybrids and historians at the same time, if you just simply use the same logic against Kai, and you take the idea of The Father's one universal, or one usia. The humanity is one universal, one usia. Christ is consubstantial with both. Therefore, two natures, and you're not qualifying what the natures are, like whether they be particular relations or usia. Are you now saying that two usias come together on account of the relation of the Father and the Son? And are you now falling into the Severan dilemma of the universal incarnation?
Right. Because you can't have an usia contemplated on its own without its respective hypostases, for you to even say two usia in Christ, you need to first take that step of conceptually dividing the two hypostases. So that's why you need to take that step. If you are simply going to say two usia unqualified, and that's the level of the union, and he remains two, then you're conceding what's common to everyone, and what's common to the Trinity is what united. And what do the fathers say is in usia? Saint Cyril specifically, even Damascene concedes, the usia contains as a compendium all of the hypostases within it. So two usia coming together would be the entire Trinity and the entire human race uniting.
And here's a simple syllogism. Well, it's not so simple. It requires some philosophical knowledge, but I'm sure Kai, with all the philosophical and metaphysical knowledge he brags about constantly, I'm sure he can understand this. So nature, we know, is defined as the principle and cause of motion and rest inherent to a thing. It exists by necessity and it's not accidental. Accidental is the Aristotelian category, basically meaning that it's not something that's necessary, it's something that exists within a subject. So we're saying nature is a principle and cause of motion, okay? Premise, if you accept that the principle of motion is numbered according to essence, so one essence means one principle of motion, then both the Trinity and the human species would each have numerically one principle of motion. This is obviously not true because all of humanity does not have one principle of motion. Now, if you say that the principle of motion is numerated by person because we are many persons and we each have our own motion, again, this is not true because then you'd have to say that the Trinity has many principles of motion. If the principle of motion is numbered by numerical unity is a specific type of unity. It means a concrete unity, a concrete oneness. Then the Trinity is one principle of motion because they are one unity, while men are many principles of motion because they have multiple unities. Now, following this understanding, answer us this question: do the two natures have each their own numerical unity or not? It's a very simple question. Does each nature have its own numerical unity or not? If it does, then okay, you can say two natures, but now you've made two numerical entities. If you deny it, then you would have to concede one nature.
Right. So effectively, the logical conclusion, let's say they admit two numerical unities. That's why they can speak of two usia, right? It's no longer formal unity that's only picked up in the mind and then requires a examination of the human hypostasis. Let's say they skip that, got straight into it. The two natures are just numerical unities themselves. That now becomes a concession to either the three gods, like I said, because it's the same principle and we're all many men, or all of humanity is just one man. And then you have no way to account for tritheistic dilemmas against the Trinity. Right? Is that kind of the conclusion you're making if you concede that the humanity has its own numerical unity?
Exactly. To have oneness, it means to be undivided in yourself and divided from another. So again,
right.
For each nature to have its own numerical unity, you're gonna have to concede division. You're gonna have to concede numerical distinction and many big problems.
All right, let's keep that going.
But the Orientals, they will say one nature. They will do some gymnastics following Severus, where they'll say, well, we don't speak of divided natures or something like that. And that's kind of like going to get around the problem. Like, no, it doesn't get around the problem because I'm asking you very simple questions with regards to Christ's consubstantiality. We're counting the natures. So if you're telling me that as a result, I have to profess one nature and I cannot say two natures, I'm forbidden to say two natures, then that means you're following that metaphysical paradigm of Apollinarius that denies consubstantiality. And that is the irony of it, where the Orientals, they want to preserve consubstantiality. That's what they want to profess that, but they don't realize that their metaphysical paradigm prohibits them. It's just the exact same how Nestorius was saying is, no, I do not profess two persons. There's not two persons in Christ, but we say, no, this is your paradigm. This is what you're holding as metaphysical particulars. This is the logical conclusion. So if you follow the Orientals in exactly the same way, it doesn't matter what you want to profess. That is not what your metaphysical paradigm teaches. You're following, you're not following St. Cyril.
Just a quick note. It doesn't matter what you say our metaphysical system actually happens. You're just professing it. Now what? Whose word are we going to take? It's almost like you have to respond to what I say and I have to respond to what you say. Why are you not giving me that charity and responding to what I have to say? How do you know you're not professing arguments that don't follow? You're just professing them. You're just professing we believe in a tertium quid, professing we believe in Apollinarianism. It's just hypocritical. Let's keep it going.
You're not following the Cappadocians. You're following Severus, who set up his own separate metaphysical paradigm that aligns with Apollinarius. That's it.
All right. Yeah, I just want to add some quick things. So, in terms of I'll give you the quote that I was talking about in regards to difference, but not speaking of two. So this is from Ian Torrance's book Christology After Chalcedon. This book has the letters of Severus to Sergius, the Eutychian that I was talking about previously, and he quotes something from Severus. This is in page 83 in the book that I'm talking about. So we have receipts here. This is Ian Torrance talking. Severus turns at once to apply the insights of this example to Christology. First, he refers to Kyril's defense against Andrew over the.
You need business tech that's flexible, efficient, and delicious.
I think he's citing Severus here, right? He says, it is quite blameless to recognize that the flesh is one thing and the only begotten another with respect to their own natures, but to recognize this difference is not to divide the natures after union. Just making sure, like in the case that, actually that's from St. Cyril, there's another one where Severus speaks about, I think this is page 160. So
iKan, anything you want to say on that part?
How about you start us off?
No, you have to say it. He verbatim said he's going to make a critique against Severus. He cites something, realizes it's Cyril midway. I don't know what to say.
Welcome back, Leontius.
Right.
I almost prophesied.
Keep it going.
This is Severus talking for absolutely like 100%. You should not. You should confess Emmanuel's divinity and humanity, and not deny difference and particularity with respect to the natural quality of the natures from which the one Christ is brought together to an indivisible union. Right. So he says you can confess the distinction, but then he says, and you should think it iniquitous to divide Christ into a duality. So if you speak of them as two, you're dividing the one Christ into a duality of natures after the union. Basically, that's so. It's basically quite strange. And one thing I liked from the article you're talking about, Kai, is. One of the things that St. Basil says, we must therefore confess the faith by adding the particular to the common. So when we speak of a particular thing, we add the common nature that is a part of, so to speak. So he used the example of God, the Father, right? So the common, God, and then the particular idiom of, of fatherhood, God the Father. I mean, this kind of already explains our Christology, because even if you are monophysite, you will have to say that Christ is, if he's doubly consubstantial, then Christ is in any way. And of course, anyone will try to defend that. Anyone who believes Christ is God and man will try to say he's double consubstantial. He's consubstantial with God and man simultaneously. We'll say that he's part of both the common things, whether it's divinity or humanity. Right? He's part of both. We'll try to indicate something regarding that. But we said that Christ is in two natures, so we're naming the common things that he's part of, the commonalities, and we're also saying it's the Word of God, the particular Word of God. Another thing, and this is very important, I talked about tertium quid, and I think it's important to actually explain, like, what is the tertium quid? Of course, it's a new thing that comes about as a result of the union of two things. But how is it different from a natural union of two natures? So how do we understand it? In what senses, etc., etc.? A key characteristic of tertium quids, and I think Jay, you can back me up on this, is that it has new emergent properties. In the case of rational beings, new emergent activities arising from the union of the things that it is united from, whether they're two things or three things or four things or whatever.
Pause right here. His criteria for a tertium quid, remember this, is new emergent activities that could not have been done by like either of the two things. His argument, a new emergent activity that couldn't have been done by either of the two things. Keep it going.
I'll try to find the exact page from. I don't have the exact page, but this is from the same book, the Ian Torrance book. Severus of Antioch uses the example of walking on water as proof of this new energy, basically this emergent new activity. If you have a new emergent activity as a result of a union of two things, that's a tertium quid. That's kind of the definition of a
Pause right here.
New thing, because
Pause right here. I'm so sorry for what I'm about to do. David Erhan, at the very beginning of my stream, when I told my chat, keep this in the back of your head, I'm going to remind you what you said, David Erhan. You said in clear, uncontrovertible terms that the human nature of Christ on its own could not walk on water. Okay, so now we know that the humanity can't do this activity on its own. That was your own words. I can remind you, I can get the clip. That was your own words. And it's also the case, God doesn't have feet to walk on water. Then if the humanity can't do it, and the divinity can't do it, and you believe in the gospel that this event happened, then you believe in a tertium quid by your standard, that if it's a new emergent activity that can't be done by either one of the parts, it's a third thing. Thank you, David Erhan. You're in the same boat as me now with that really terrible criteria for what constitutes a tertium quid. Thank you. Because it was your mouth which said that the humanity on its own cannot walk on water. That was your own words. So by your words you will be justified. By your words you will be condemned. Let's keep it plain.
Not
Well, the new energy would signify the new nature, right?
Yes.
Since energy follows and signifies nature.
That's a key point. Text 26, where he commentates on St. Dionysius the Areopagite, saying that Christ has a new theandric energy, which we previously explained, right? It's a new mode in which both the energies operate in one Christ. He says, we understand in the sense of abolishing any duality. So there's no two wills, no two energies. It's one and it's new, in the sense of a tertium quid. Severus says here, again, I don't recall the exact page. I don't have the page number exactly, but this is from, again, Ian Torrance's book, Christology after Chalcedon. This is one of the letters to Sergius the Eutychian monophyte. But he mingled the two, establishing that he is indivisibly one, the same Son and Word, who on our behalf unchangeably became man, speaking as befits God and humanity. Thus, too, it is often possible to see in his actions what belongs to the character of God and what is human mingled together. So, kind of, okay, so far it seems good, right? Like he's talking about distinguishing the sayings of Christ. But now, this is the key part. For how will anyone divide walking upon the water? What does he mean here? For to run upon the sea is foreign to the human nature, but it is not proper to the divine nature to use bodily feet. So here he's saying that this activity that we're talking, walking on water, it's neither divine, it's neither human. And he says, therefore, that action is of the incarnate Word, to whom belongs at the same time divine character and humanity indivisibly. This is tertium quid. This is the definition of a tertium quid. Out of the union of
Pause. Then why did you say it's not human? Why did you say it's not human then? If that's what makes it a tertium quid. You said in clear terms, the human nature on its own cannot walk on water. And if that's your criteria, well, now it's a tertium quid. If the humanity couldn't do it, the divinity couldn't do it, then it's a new emergent activity. You are now believing in a tertium quid by your own standard. It's so explicit. It's so explicit. I'm gonna put this as a timestamp. I have to. Showing where you said that and what you're saying now. Let's keep playing.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just want to say that if his very criteria of divine human energy as a new energy is a tertium quid, then you've got to condemn St. Gregory of Nyssa, you got to condemn St. Gregory the theologian, St. Athanasius, all the pre-Chalcedonian fathers. And I'm making a video on the energy of Christ, but basically they do admit that there is one divine human energy from the one composite divine human nature.
Right. And he even says, Dyer says there's not a new energy. But Dionysius the Areopagite says that. And we're about to see it. Even Erhan's about to concede that he said that.
Yeah. Should I just go ahead and quote it right now? Because it's relevant.
Well, keep that. I want you to have that quote on you when they cite it, because they're not going to include that first part. They're only going to include the latter part. Okay. But the first part proves the exegesis we need. So
they'd have to condemn him as a Christian quid as well.
Yeah, keep it playing.
This emergent properties, emergent activities that cannot be found in either nature. Now, someone might ask, well, David, Christ obviously walked on water. So how is it your view, tertium quid? No, because as I've explained at the beginning of the stream, for those who might have missed it, the two natures are cooperating with one another. So the human nature is elevated by the divine nature that is united in Christ. As Pope St. Leo says, the two natures, the two forms, cooperate with one another. So the human activity, the human energy is done in a divine manner. This is based on the union of the two natures in the hypostasis of Christ. So the human nature in Christ is elevated by the union of the divinity, which gives them the ability.
Pause here.
In fact,
Erhan, simple question. Could the humanity do it before the union? Independent of the union, without the divinity being involved, could the energy of walking on water be accomplished? No. So it's a new emergent energy. According to your own standard, it couldn't have been done by the humanity without the divinity. So it can't be done by humanity. It can't be done by divinity. It requires the humanity with the extra caveat that it's united to God. That's the same standard we use. That walking is human. But this miracle itself requires divinity. So it's divine human. That's our standard. You can't steal our principle and then argue it's a tertium quid, even though your criteria for a tertium quid, your position falls in. Keep it playing.
Like true divine grace, in a way, like St. Peter could also walk on water. But in terms of what's natural to Christ, again, the human nature was elevated. And this is kind of the point of ascension.
Yes,
is that we're all elevated, or human nature becomes elevated by participation in the divine energies of God.
Yeah, that's what I say. The energies are crucial here. And I'm going to let you continue. I just want to interject this point because I've noticed discussions with the
Was my human nature elevated by the union so that I can walk on water naturally? No. So now you have a problem, Mr. Erhan. The humanity of Christ walks on water either by grace or by nature. If it's by nature and you believe the human ousia is a universal, then I naturally can walk on water now. Okay? Or you're going to have to admit it is belonging to the humanity by nature, but the humanity isn't an ousia anymore. It's now a particular. And if it's a particular and there's two of those, you're a Nestorian. So let's break down the problem you're in now. It's either the humanity does it by grace or by nature. If it's by nature, then either I can do it or Christ has a particular nature. If it's by grace, then the humanity is just an engraced man. And it was particularly engraced. The same dichotomy follows. Was I engraced to walk on water? No. So it had to be a particular engracing. And Dyer's about to concede it. Dyer's about to concede the human nature of Christ is deified by the energies and not deified by natural union. You'll see it. He does the exact same Nestorian presupposition. The exact same one.
And these people, it's like they don't listen to what we are saying about in what way and how the human nature of Christ is deified. So the energies deify the human nature. That's why the Sixth Council says his humanity, his human will, etc. We're fully deified. So that's the way, in the sense in which there is a change in the human nature when it's united to the Logos. So there is a real change. It's not like we're denying that, you know, there's a real union, because they're going to say that we're being Nestorian. How can we be Nestorian when we think that there's a real deification of the humanity of Christ? But that doesn't mean that the humanity of Christ turns into the divine essence or the divine nature. In fact, St. Cyril denies that as well. Cyril says that it's the uncreated grace and immortality that transforms and transfigures the human nature. And he doesn't, even in the two letters to Sixth Census, he still speaks of, even after the incarnation, two natures. So there's no problem when it comes to a real union.
The second letter to Sixth Census verbatim says, I understand that another query has been raised in regard to these matters as follows, that there is nothing to concede, but he suffered in the nature of humanity. If this is the case, then how can we not concede that there is two natures subsisting inseparably after the union? This objection is yet another attack on those who say there is one incarnate nature of the Son. They want to show the idea is foolish. They keep on arguing at every turn that two natures subsist. They have forgotten, however, etc., 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 etc. I can go on forever. I have this quote memorized. I always say it. Everyone should have it memorized by now. If you don't have this memorized, as a Miaphysite, you're doing something wrong. Where on earth did you get the idea the second letter of Sixth Census teaches two natures after the union? When he verbatim says this is an objection against the one incarnate nature of the Son. Verbatim. He says two natures subsisting inseparably after the union. Word for word. Word for word. Diophysis metahenosis, and then the word for inseparable. I forget what it is. Two natures after the union inseparably. He says this is an objection against the true faith. He says that. I can give you the Greek.
And
uses those exact words.
And let's address a tertium quid real quick. I want to address it from a philosophical perspective. Let's see what Aristotle says. Aristotle says, now for some things there is a conversion, those namely which share the same matter, being able both to act upon one another and to be affected by one another. Some things, on the other hand, though they act, are incapable of being affected, those namely which do not have the same matter. So of these there is no mixing. And then he also explains in the same quote that things, when they are united, because they are mixed, they become potential. And so how do we define mixture and tertium quid? What is a tertium quid? A tertium quid is they become a third thing that is neither one of the prior things. So a mixture happens. Now here, according to Aristotle, a mixture cannot happen between things that do not share the same matter. David Erhan is going to make the point in a bit that because soul and body are actually somewhat similar, in because soul is not absolutely invisible or absolutely spiritual. He's going to make the argument that soul and body are actually able to become one, but that God, who's fully uncreated and fully invisible and fully immaterial, and all these things, this is the one thing that makes him incapable of becoming one nature with humanity. But here, Aristotle actually argues that it is the things which share the same matter, which are homogeneous with one another, like two liquids. It is these things that are actually able to mix.
Right.
And so,
which is exactly what we say.
Yeah, if we're saying that God actually is not capable, as God does not have the same matter as humanity, metaphysically, it is actually impossible for him to be mixed.
Right. Yeah, that's my argument for tertium quid. It requires two things. It requires that the things are contraries, so they can have a middle position, and it requires that they be of the same layer of reality, or as Aristotle says, having homogeneous matter, right, made up of the same stuff or similar stuff. So if you don't have both of those, you can't have a tertium quid. That's an actual criteria, not this made up. If it's a new activity that couldn't have been done without the. That's not a standard. And if that is a standard, we all believe in a tertium quid. You yourself said the human nature on its own cannot walk on water. It is not an energy of humanity. It requires the union of the divinity. And you said it's natural. Your buddy on the panel said it's energetic. So you have a four-way dilemma. Option one, it's natural and therefore we all have it. Number two, it's natural but only to the particular humanity of Christ, which would be Nestorianism. Number
Right.
three, it's energetic to all of us, which isn't the case, otherwise I could do it. Or it's energetic to the particular Christ, which is adoptionism.
Right. And mixture, according to Aristotle, is when the things that were united become potential and the actual, and the one thing is the actual. But we would never say the word and the flesh have become potential. If you can find the saying that the word and the flesh are potential and they now exist in potentiality after the union, we'll concede to you that we teach a tertium quid.
All right, let's keep it playing.
And a real deification of human nature. Their position, because of their lack of clarity on the essence energy distinction, is the one that actually doesn't make any sense of the in what sense the union deifies the humanity.
Also,
I'll tell you how it doesn't. I'll tell you how it doesn't. I'll tell you it's not Christ's humanity being energized or graced. That's not what it is. The deification is at a natural level. He makes it one with himself. If you believe the humanity of Christ is only deified by energies and grace, then it's completely volitional and it's not one ontological subject. There is a subject receiving that grace. There has to be a giver and the thing being given. If the thing is given grace, it can be a subject which receives grace.
We can move to the modern examples of Orientals who try to discuss this. There's a very interesting quote from so-called Pope Shenouda amongst the Orientals, and he's one of their recent bishops. He's considered very important, he's highly revered, he's highly respected. So this is not just some bishop, right? This is not like the Metropolitan Callistus Ware fallacy that we see very often. Though Metropolitan Callistus Ware does have a lot of good contributions, of course, but he gets treated as if he's the one representative of Orthodoxy or something like that. But Shenouda is someone that's actually really important. He has a book. It's very short. It's obviously to kind of explain Oriental Christology. It's called On the Nature of Christ, and he makes the argument that nature is the sum of natural properties. Which nature is the sum of natural properties. So far, it's really good. That's what we're saying. That's why we say Christ has two natures, right? He has the natural properties of divinity and humanity. That's why he has two natures. But I'll read you the quote.
The bold quest.
Where he goes wrong. The one incarnate nature of God, the Word, is not a third nature of Jesus Christ, which, as we've explained, that's the new emergent properties and activities. So clearly, it is a third nature, but obviously they argue against this because the nature is the sum of properties or qualities. And since the two natures of Christ were united without mingling or change, then the incarnate nature is the sum of the qualities of both his divinity and his humanity. So you notice what's going on here. Nature isn't just it isn't just like person in Oriental. It really is nature in the sense that we use it. It's just that if nature is the sum of natural properties and Christ is divine and human natural properties, well, they're both part of the same set, right? And it's both part of the same set of the one nature. And so the one nature is in a sense basically a distinct essence from divinity and humanity. And so when they use the body-soul analogy, they're really going full throttle on it because the body and the soul, when they unite, they form human nature, right? And as human nature, there are certain activities that emergent properties and activities as a result of the union of body and soul. And it's a new nature, so to speak. It's basically in that sense, completely. It's not an analogy. It's not an analogy in the sense that there might be some distinctions within the analogy, right? We make the sun analogy, and of course there are some disanalogies regarding the sun. The sun is a physical thing, for example, it's a created thing. But here, it's basically completely the same. The analogy is completely the same. You have divinity and humanity, and they form a new nature, a third new nature at the end of this. And as I said, and I'm repeating this over and over again, but it's a really important point. The defining aspect of a tertium quid is the new emergent properties. In the case of rational beings, new emergent activities. That's kind of the whole. And if you're talking about a nature or an essence, then yes, the monophysite Christ necessarily is a tertium quid. But as I said, the quote that I just gave from Pope Shenouda, it's from On the Nature of Christ, where he also makes arguments against Orthodox Christology in this work.
If I can just add to that, the whole tertium quid.
Pause. Skip over. Well, I think he's about to do it either way, but this was not Pope Shenouda, and even Erhan corrects himself. So keep it. Just let it play.
This is something that is within the Monophysite camp itself. When you read the Christology after Chalcedon book, the exchanges between Severus and Sergius basically, he starts the whole process of the exchanges because he's writing to the synod that has.
Sorry, Kai, can I just correct something? I did make a mistake here. The quote is not from Shenouda, sorry, it's from Metropolitan Bishop of Damiette. He's the Oriental. This is from his interpretation of the First Agreed Statement on Christology, paragraph 8. So it's right here. It's different work that I was referring to.
So Erhan is making the argument. He thought it was Pope Shenouda, but then he corrected himself. That's actually Ambab Shoy. Ambab Shoy said nature is a set of properties. So therefore, that's the Chalcedonian definition. It's a bundle of predicates. So iKan, let's talk about what Ambab Shoy actually believed, why this is a ridiculous, to simply just say that as is, that nature is just a bundle of properties, why that's a ridiculous thing to hold to, etc.
So I don't even know where to begin. I don't know whether to deal with their terrible misunderstanding of Ambab Shoy, or whether to deal with Erhan's terrible understanding of Christology. This is a true blunder. I've never seen anything like this. Somebody who should know better is making such a basic mistake. So here, Erhan, I don't know if he's already said it or if he will say it in a couple seconds. He says that he agrees with this definition that nature is a bundle of properties. If nature is a bundle of properties, does he realize what he's saying? He's ascribing to the bundle theory of objectness. This is David Hume's theory that an object is all that an object is that it's
Just a
just
collection of properties.
Yeah, collection of properties. Obviously, this is not true. And the thing is, the church fathers actually already deal with this heresy. This is the heresy of Eunomius. What did Eunomius say? The divine essence is the properties itself. It is identical to them in the sense of having the same definition. He argues that, for example, the divine essence is unbegottenness, and thus he says that the Son does not have the divine essence because he's not unbegotten. So this is a terrible, terrible mistake. This is why the fathers, we constantly find statements from them that if
that nature is not its properties.
If uncreated is in essence, immortal is in essence, the blah 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 is in essence, then God will be many essences. That's why the energies are not the same as the essence. So now he's the one, the guy that loves talking about the essence energy distinction. This is his whole thing. Now he's the one that's saying that the essence is defined as a bunch of properties. It's hilarious. But let's move on. The next thing is he tries to say that this is Mbab Choi's view. Now, does Mbab Choi truly believe this? No. Keep in mind, he cited the work. This is the first interpretation of the agreed. This is the interpretation of the first agreed statements. So here, who is the people he's writing to? The laity. He's offering an explanation to simplify things for them. So he's not giving a strict definition. He's giving a loose definition that nature is expressed or manifested by its properties. But he's not saying it's the same exact thing, and I'll prove this in a second. So he's just using simple terminology to offer an interpretation for the dialogues to explain them to the people that don't know better. For the fact that Erhan will cite this and say we agree with this, and this proves two natures, this is an embarrassment on Erhan. Because Erhan, as I said, has Eminence Metropolitan Bishoy. He's not making a metaphysical claim. He's making a simplistic explanation. What is David Erhan doing? He is offering a metaphysical claim. He's saying this is what nature is. This whole discussion is a metaphysical discussion. And so he's just ascribed to the bundle theory, which is a Eunomian theory. Now, does Mbab Choi believe that a nature is purely a bundle of properties? No. In the same work, if Erhan just maybe read the whole thing, I don't know if maybe he's been skipping around or what he's
Probably
doing.
not.
If he read the whole thing, Mbab Choi says the Oriental Orthodox are referring to the personalized nature, which can be correctly named the hypostases. But on the other hand, nobody can deny that it's also named the nature.
Right. And by the way, Erhan denied that this is what Mbab Choi meant. He said, for the Orientals, nature isn't just signifying the person. He said that verbatim. Erhan.
Yeah. And so for Mbab Choi, it is a nature, it is a hypostasis. It is not the same thing as a collection of properties. And if that is your view at David Erhan, then you've made a terrible philosophical mistake. You are a Eunomian. You're everything that you accuse the Thomists of being.
You're a Thomist, right? You believe in identity relation between the Usia and the energies.
At least the Thomists understand that this is a problem. They try to step away from it. He's not even stepping away from it. He's falling right into the trap. He's saying this is what he believes. That nature.
What happens when you make a bundle about the particular fleshly properties in Christ, like being born in Bethlehem, his specific eye color, his specific hair color, and then the specific divine properties, being the only begotten, being the sender of the Spirit, right? If you made a bundle of those particular properties, how many hypostases do you have by your method of counting?
Exactly. If the object is defined by the bundle of properties, then nature is a bundle of properties, of natural properties. Then in that same sense, hypostasis is a bundle of hypostatic properties. You've made a terrible mistake.
Right, which now either collapses to two hypostases, or they're going to argue there's just no hypostatic distinction in Christ. That he just has one set, which is monophysite, Eutychian, like literally.
Precisely.
All right, let's keep that going.
I'm referencing Metropolitan Bishop Damiet, the Oriental Monophysite Metropolitan, of course. He's also an important figure in according to the Oriental, so he's not a random bishop. He's also very important. But yeah, the natures itself, natural properties, is from Bishoy, not from Shiluda. So you can continue. Just want to correct myself.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No problem. So basically, what Sergius is doing is the synod has put out a statement of how
your TCG Player Cyber Weekend quest starts.
We've given them so much money this stream.
How many ads is he running?
the monophysitic Christology accurately. And Sergius is puzzled because he's basically writing to the synod and he's saying, or to one person there, whoever was connected with the synod, and he's asking, basically, he's like, I have a bunch of these people who are from like the Orthodox camp, the like our side, who want to become Monophysites. So basically, the Diophysites want to become Monophysites or Miaphysites, and he's asking them, he's like, how am I supposed to receive them? What is the profession that I'm supposed to give to them? Because what you guys as a synod are telling me, they already profess this. It's like you're telling me that we as Monophysites, we don't speak of undivided natures or undivided particularities or undivided properties or whatever. It's like, we're not making any kind of division here when we speak. Well, when you ask these Diophysites, they're saying the exact same thing. They're not dividing the natures. So what is actually setting us apart from them that we have to confess them in a different way? What is the proper verbiage? Because Sergius was a true Monophysite. For him, he openly professed the tertium quid. And he's making exactly these arguments that David is saying. He's like, when you look at the activities of Christ, Sergius is making this argument. He's like saying, he's like, look, you're seeing Christ do what is not natural to God and that is not natural to man. He's doing some new thing that indicates that you have indeed a new nature. So Sergius is telling us, look, he's understanding the Apollinarian metaphysical paradigm. He's following it to its logical conclusion and saying is, therefore, it's not a matter of speaking of undivided properties or particularities. We don't even talk about undivided language. We have to profess one nature in its actual reality, in its particularity, in its particular, because now this one nature is in itself a new particularity that is neither the particularities of divinity or humanity. It is something new. And so then that's what starts this whole chain reaction between the exchanges between Severus and Sergius, where you now have Severus doing just basically a bunch of word salad, meaningless stuff, just trying to justify.
Oh, nice refutation.
And say one, but at the same time admit that there's two. So that's basically what the entire exchange boils down to.
Yeah, I mean, the point about like the numbering, I mean, I think Jay, you guys also talked about like they will invoke counting by division, right? And so if you're counting two things, you're necessarily by nature dividing. But I'll say that like shortly, like my take on it in general is that conceptual distinction already solves that. When St. Kirill speaks about speaking of two united natures in theory alone, that's actually what he's saying. He's saying that the separation is purely mental, but in reality there's in reality they're distinct, right? And so the two-ness, the separation that will come about from it is only in the mind. So already.
He's now questioned. How does counting by division fare in your system? Erhan doesn't deny it. He doesn't deny counting by division. He actually says we can apply it. So actually, we have to because Cyril employed two natures in the mind. So the separation from that two-ness is in the mind alone. My friend, do you not understand why it's called counting by division? It means you count two things as two if they are divided. That's the counting method you're using. If any two things are divided, you count them as two objects. Now, if you're saying you agree with that, then if you have two natures, they must be divided. And if you're saying that division is only in the mind, then you're saying that counting is only in the mind. That's why it's called counting by division. So if that's division, if you're accepting counting by division and saying that division is only in the mind, then you're saying that counting is only in the mind. That necessarily follows. So what is Erhan going to do? Sleight of hand. His sleight of hand is going to be, we use counting by division and theoria, but in reality, we're going to use counting by distinction, which literally just means counting by identity, but I don't know if he knows the right term to use. So let's listen to him say that.
There's the crisis acknowledged in two natures, which is a mental activity. So it's hitting that trend. It was written by Richard Price notes 13 of the 18 draft writers were, I think they were like in Ephesus 2, and they like voted with Dioscorus, and the other people, like none of them were sympathetic to the Antiochian, like Nestorianish.
You know what's cool? You know what's cool? They never wrote into natures until the legates forced them and threatened to move the council. What is this argument? Oh, they don't have a Nestorian bias. So when they said into natures, that's actually the Cyrillian position. Dude, that their form of the creed didn't have that. Read session 5. When they wrote the creed, it said from two natures. Then the legate said to change it to into natures because that's what Leo says. And then they threatened to move the council to Italy, and then they buckle and write the creed as into natures. So you don't know anything about the session 5. Read session 5. Into natures was not a Cyrillian thing. It wasn't their first intuition. Their first intuition was to write what was orthodox, and then it was opposed by the legates, and the legates forced them to write into natures. Let's keep it playing.
These people that wrote, and I will say they probably are hitting on that trend as well. So it's, to me, it's a non-problem, but also at the same time, especially when we're discussing these things today, right? Like we also speak of like numbered things by distinction, and of course when we talk about the Trinity, I mean that's the most premier example when we speak of three persons of the Trinity. We're not dividing the persons of the Trinity, and I know that there are some fathers that speak of like indivisible division and that the persons of the Trinity are divided by the hypostasis. But
yeah, but these people are so low tier they think that type of language means that you're like cutting it up into parts. It's just so
exactly.
Guys,
pause. Nice refutation to the quotes. The persons aren't divided. Oh, I know they have quotes that say the persons are divided, but my opponents are idiots. Yeah, that's how we respond to that. My opponents are idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. Yeah, you're right, man. They are. Is that really the argument we're gonna run? Seriously? Seriously? What's the response? Why did the father say both East and West, pre-schism, post-schism? Saint Jerome, your own saints, Maximus the Greek, Maximus the Confessor, John of Damascus, even Leontius of Jerusalem, Leontius of Byzantium, pre-schism, Saint Gregory the Theologian, Saint Gregory of Nyssa, Saint Basil, Saint Cyril, even Saint Jerome. Why do they all say there is division in the category of hypostases in the Trinity? Why do they say that? Why? Oh, my opponents are dumb. That's why. Opponents think that means there's parts. Yeah, there's no parts. You don't understand how really flawed your counting method is. You think that the Trinity, you're only counting because the properties are distinguished just by non-identity. That isn't why the Trinity is 3 persons. You know why the Trinity is 3 persons? Because each of the distinct marks are completely really distinct. They have a proportional division. The Father is unbegotten. The Son is begotten. That is a total proportional division in the predicate. Arsenius, if you want to talk about actually what is proportional division, whether the persons of Trinity be called undivided, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, before I do, like, I think they kind of embarrass themselves here because they think that there's only one type of division, right? Like Dyer said, oh, we're stupid because if we speak of division, now the Trinity is cut up into parts or pieces, right? Or partitions. There are different types of conditions of division based off the things that you're picking out, right? If you speak of actual division, you're speaking of like division between beings. If something is true of me, it's not necessarily true of you. If you speak of potential division, it's something potential of an actual division, like the body and soul, they have potential division. But like you said, Agen, you brought up proportional division. Proportional division is the enumeration between cause and effect or source and origin, so on and so forth. It's kind of the division between 2 different modes of existence. And this is how the fathers describe the division, right? We speak of the mode of the Father, mode of the Son, or the hypostasis of the Father and the hypostasis of the Son. They're proportionally divided, not according to, different substances and not according to different parts, but according to the enumeration between the modes of subsistence.
All right. So our counting method actually is applicable between tridology and Christology. The fact that the duality in the Trinity is what led St. Cyril, St. Basil, St. Gregory, St. Jerome to say that the persons are hypostatically divided. Then if there's 2 natures, these 2 natures being totally opposite in every way, how on earth is that not a division? How on earth? How on earth? We have the same counting method. Nobody is the persons in the Trinity. It's not merely that there's discernibility between Father and the Son, right? Because you could have a formal discernibility, right? A discernibility in a formal distinction way. But what makes the persons actually really distinguished? It's that proportional division. One is ungenerate, the other is generate. One is cause, the other is the cause one. Even between the Son and the Spirit, you can find a form of that proportional division. That the Saint Gregory Thaumaturgus says, the Son is the prototype of the Spirit, and the Spirit is caused by the Father. So if the Spirit requires as the type by which the Father is going to solely proceed, because we believe in monopatrism, the Father is going to solely precede the Spirit on account of the prototype of the Son, that would create a proportional division between the hypostases of the Son and the Spirit. So we have a consistent counting method. Simply saying, oh, I know the quotes they use that just refuted my point is not a refutation to the quotes. Oh, I'm aware of it. That's not a refutation. I could be aware of all of your arguments, but that doesn't mean I've refuted them. What's the refutation? Oh, they're idiots, man. Yeah, they think that means parts. Yeah. You don't understand, dude. The division is katapinoia. Read David Bradshaw's book on this. Oh, the distinction is in the mind, but even the Thomists, and they all say that, it's in the mind. So that's just please keep playing. I don't know what to do.
I literally saw a comment recently that they actually created a new counting method. So they're saying is we count the Trinity, we use counting by division, but when we're in the Christological context and the natures, we count by composition. I have.
By the way, I don't know if you guys catch up on that, but literally no one speaks of counting by composition. We'll speak of counting by unity, counting by division as negations of each other. But like, what does composition look like, or counting by composition even look like?
Yeah, I haven't seen that either. I don't know who he's referencing. Maybe he did say he's never watched any of our stuff or seen any of our arguments. So I don't know if he's maybe watching them on offsites in the sewers. I don't know.
Yeah. It's even funny to point out, keep it paused. It's funny to point out that based on what Erhan just said, there's nothing funny about counting by composition because Erhan made a blunder. Instead of saying counting by identity, Erhan said counting by distinction, right? So he did the opposite. He got it confused. Counting by identity means if the things have the same identity, they're one object. If they have distinction, then they're multiple objects. So the same here. If we're taking Erhan's blunder and you want to be consistent, then counting by composition is just an extension of counting by unity, which is the reverse of counting by division. So if Erhan has no issue saying counting by distinction, which is not a term people use, and all he means by that is the reverse, counting by identity, then when somebody says counting by unity or counting by composition, they're just doing the same thing. They're saying the inverse of counting by division. So what's so funny? Laugh at your own friend who just said counting by distinction. What's so funny? Keep it playing.
Idea what that means. I'm not that stupid to actually understand what that means. I cannot fathom it.
I'm not to understand what it means. I like that.
When you have to, I mean, this is kind of like Occam's razor becomes useful here. I mean, if you have to make up a bunch of
Scammers demand payment with gift card.
This is my favorite part. He's gonna make something that is so ironic for him to say.
If EO is true, Allah would let them be funny. Oh, we've given them like at least 5 US dollars.
Yeah, like just a bunch of counterintuitive, logical, I don't know, tools to save your system. Maybe the system is the problem. Maybe you should ditch the system and become Orthodox. And that's like because in Orthodox, especially like when we speak about development, like theological development, this is actually a positive example of this because at the time
Pause right here. I like how his whole point is, oh look, now they're using counting by composition. Aha, these monophysite, they don't know what they're talking about. Look at all these explanations they need to make to justify their system. Maybe the system is a problem. Well, what about you? What about your 3 councils back to back that each one contradicts one another? What about when the Chalcedon teaches 2 energies clearly and 2 natures, and it's very explicitly Nestorian, accepting the letter of boss? And then Constantinople 2 comes along, redacts that, undoes it, basically says, "Oh yeah, the letter of boss, that never happened." That never happened. There's actually one energy, by the way. We're gonna say that in passing. There's one energy.
Or not even ecclesially. The natures are particular, the natures are universal, the natures are particular universals.
Natures are universal. Constantinople 2, natures are universal. Constantinople 3. Oh, by the way, there's actually 2 energies and 1 energy is vertical. Okay, I see it too. Actually, the natures are individual. They're no longer universals. Oh, are you serious right now? We're the ones that have inconsistency. You don't see that.
And is basing it on a YouTube comment, whereas they have it ecclesially, conciliarly.
This is interesting. Okay.
So like, when we speak of 2 natures in Christ, we're counting by distinction, not by like dividing or separating them from each other. And this is why
pause right here.
Distinction becomes
counting by distinction is that's not intuitive. It's the word is counting by identity, bro. Understand that. Keep it playing.
Like phase out over time, and like you see less and less of it in the fathers. You see sometimes in Saint Maximus. And another thing about conceptual distinction, I mean, I guess I'll add this to my video too, but like the conceptual distinction is made about the body and the soul as well. Does that mean that the body and the soul are not really distinct from each other? Obviously, like not. It's just one thing in reality, right?
Like, you know what that means? It means they're not 2 anymore. That's what Cyril says. Let us take the example of an ordinary man. We recognize 2 natures in him. There's one nature of the soul and another of their body. We not divide them except only at a theoretical level, rather subtle speculations. This is why the 2 are no longer 2. Complain with Cyril. He said the 2 are no longer 2 about the conceptual division between a body and a soul. Let's continue.
They together are one thing in reality, and they're only 2 in our mind, in the sense of like divided things, because the body and the soul are divided. That's like it's an unnatural.
They're one in reality. Pause right here. They're one in reality, but they're only 2 in the mind in the sense of divided things. But you already conceded counting by division works in your system. So if counting by division works in your system, the duality itself is only conceptual based on what you said. Welcome to the Oriental Orthodox Church, my friend. Say goodbye to Chalcedon. You know, even if we let you count by identity, right? My point is just to show you're inconsistent, because you said counting by division is fine. Even if I let you count by identity, you still couldn't come with 2 natures, because counting by identity requires already subjects of attribution with their own predicates. That's what it requires. Keep it going.
Exist together. So this kind of understanding of like conceptualization is completely far off. Anyways, I'll have a video coming soon in the future that discusses that. But I just want to add these.
That's great. Also, too, I mean, everybody who doesn't have this book should get a hold of Divine Energies and Divine Action, which is a bunch of the collected PDFs from Bradshaw that were floating around forever, Dr. Bradshaw. Because this one has the full concept of the Divine Energies essay. It's the very first one, and so he's going to deal with conceptual distinction. It's either that one or maybe it's essence energy, what kind of distinction, which is the second or third essay. So essence energy, what kind of distinction is something that in the Discord we've dealt with and promoted for 7 or 8 years now, and it's in print. So guys, there's really no excuse unless you're just lazy and you're not going to do the reading to go and understand for example, Saint Basil says that the distinction between nature and person is katapanoia. And if katapanoia only means mental and not also possibly a real distinction, then you're not really Trinitarian. So are we all modalists now? Begetting of the Son, eternal begetting, is also spoken of as katapanoia. The distinctions of the person, katapanoia. So you understand that this reductionist idea think that, oh, that means only in the mind. Again, so it's a stupid thing that we've been refuting for like a year.
Here.
Also,
what if they say monokatapanoia or monoentheoria? What now? Because that's what they do say about the natures of Christ. We've already explained this in stream 1. I recommend you check it. There's a timestamp for it, explaining epinoia and theoria in tridology and Christology. But basically, for the Cappadocians, epinoia applies to recognizing things in reality through your mind, or it applies to things solely being in the mind. You can use that word in both cases. So, of course, the Father and the Son are distinct epinoia, right? You can say the begetting, you locate at epinoia. You can say you learn about God's energies epinoia. That's fine. Nobody says that. Nobody even says that the two natures are epinoia. That's it, period. What we find in the Fathers is monoepinoia, monotheoria. That is a big difference. Only in the mind, only in thought. And they specifically negate duality after the union. They say to say two natures subsist is to divide at a more than only theoretical level. Monotheoria, verbatim.
Also, do you know who is the one who actually believed that about epinoia and conceptualization?
Is it Eunomius?
Yes, that's Eunomius' position, and you'll see this very clearly if you read Saint Gregory of Nyssa's response to Eunomius' second book. It's not against Eunomius' book 2 of Saint Gregory of Nyssa, it's response to Eunomius' second book. It's on New Advent. I mean, it's also in Saint Basil's against Eunomius, but Saint Gregory of Nyssa's, like, that entire book is all about refuting that idea. So if you read that, you'll basically see exactly the points that we're making on this. Like, the whole book is about conceptualization being real, and he basically says, like, he insults Eunomius for suggesting that conceptualization only means something that's in the mind that doesn't correspond or is not in reality.
And this is exactly what all these just retarded Roman Catholic Thomists have said against us, as well as the factions of the retards in our own so-called Orthodox circles. I'm not saying we're not Orthodox, but you know what I'm talking about. The circles within so-called Orthodoxy that talk so much about
Orthodoxy
and all this stuff over the years. Go ahead.
Yeah, Kai, do you have anything else to add? I think I covered pretty much everything I had in mind so far on this.
Yeah, no, I covered what I wanted to cover. I know that I think you wanted to start wrapping things up, so maybe we should just leave the other stuff that I wanted to discuss until the next stream. It's more the essence energy distinction and why it's specific.
Let's skip Kairos to the super chats. Also, before that, iKan read Dionysius, the Areopagite's explanation of the divine human energy, and specifically the sentence before as well.
Right. So they conveniently only focus on the part where he says a certain new theanic energy, but they leave out the part where he says, this is letter 4 to Gaius, and for the rest, not having done things divine as God, nor things human as man, but exercising for us a certain new theanic energy of God having become man. So the things that are human, he did not do them as man alone. The things that are divine, he did not do them as God alone. And so by that same logic, is Saint Dionysius teaching a tertium quid? I mean, he's even using the language of new. He's even going that far. And he just said that these things don't belong to divinity alone or to humanity alone. So what now? What now? Is he teaching tertium quid? I know some of them will say, oh, but this is just talking about the actions that are done. Like, it's talking about the actions, not the energy. Like the effects of the energy, not the energy itself. There's still an issue here. First off, he's saying that all of it is not, none of it is done as God alone or as man alone. And this proves the one theanic energy. So this is the energy itself. And then they'll say, well, it's a mode of energy. Well, he's calling it an energy.
Right. All right, let's skip to the super chats.
Oh, what timestamp was it?
No idea. We don't even have to watch it if iKan, do you remember the things they said in the super chat? I think it was debating me. They mentioned a Muslim thing, and I think the rest was like, is there anything else of importance?
That might be it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about Kai debating me. He basically we already talked about this in my community posts when I was responding to him. He basically said if he wants to have a debate with me, then I have to write like a formal write-up first, because he's been doing it on his Substacks. So I have to do it, and then he has to kind of measure what it is I believe before we start debating. Kai, we have done 4 streams so far, me and you. My first stream was 4 hours. My second stream was 2 hours. My third stream was 2 hours. My fourth stream was 3 hours. Do you not know my position? Do you not know my critiques against you? No matter what I write, you're going to say, see, I'm not going to debate him. No matter what. If it's a perfect articulation, if it's perfectly logical, you're going to say, yeah, don't like it. So Kai, enough with these games. Let's just have the discussion. I'm willing to do the 1v3 like I've said. I'm willing to do this politely. Even Dyer on the thing, he said he's willing to debate me, but it's only because when I went to debate him, I was spurging and yelling, which never happened. Everyone has the footage. He conveniently made it members only, so no one can verify. But if you look at the debate on my channel, I didn't yell at him. I didn't insult him. It was actually, he was doing it, and he's projecting that on me now. He made up excuses like I reported his stream. That never happened. He has no proof for that. I can promise you. I did not report your stream, Dyer. And he went on a whole fuss on Twitter saying he will never talk to me, etc., etc. So it just shows they don't know whether or not to enter a discussion on this. They would rather keep writing their blog posts, doing their streams where they mention our refutations but don't respond to it. I think they're even going to write a book, they said on Twitter, against what it is we believe, which I find it crazy, right? You're going to keep on saying that my position isn't worth taking seriously. It was dealt with 5 years ago. Agen doesn't understand metaphysics, but you're putting into print an entire book against this altercation that we've been having online, whether these repetitive streams back and forth, which I find that ironic and hypocritical. Now, if you guys want to mention Kai basically said that a friend of mine leaked a debate to a Muslim that I was hiding, and is now basically siding with the Muslims. Kairos, can you explain who sent the video to who and how it ended up with the Muslims?
Yeah, I mean, they basically wanted to set up a debate between a Muslim and Agen, and they were making all these crazy excuses and conditions. So one of those conditions were if we set up the debate, you have to send the Dean responds full video unedited. But you know, we were looking for it, and then after we were looking for it, like, okay guys, we got in, they're like, oh, we need to like verify that you guys didn't edit it even further. And then afterwards from that, I sent it to someone else who we told him that when I sent it to you.
Did I tell you to send it to him?
Yes, you told me once we're done with the debate, send it to this third party, and then from this third party they will send it to Dean. So with nothing.
So yeah, basically Kai is saying that this magically got leaked. By the way, I offered Dean the clipped out sections. I never wanted to give him the full thing so he doesn't just repurpose the debate, trying to make it look like he won. I offered him the clipped out sections because my video already included the entirety of the debate. Even when he posted, it was just like 11 minutes out of the whole debate, which on my count is like an hour 30. And even in that, it was already stuff I already explained in my own footage. So nothing got leaked. I don't know why you're now trying to side with the Muslims. This is like completely embarrassing. Now that they have no arguments against our position, they're just going to play, you're hiding stuff, right? You can't even enter a debate, even if your position is right, whatever it may be. So yeah, I find this ridiculous, and I find it counterintuitive, right? I think it would be much better if we're on some form of mutual platform where it's moderated. We just have a discussion. I'm even willing to give you guys the advantage. It can be you three versus me. If you want to make it a 3 versus 3, we can do the people here, or a 2 versus 2. We can have iKan, whatever it may be. I'm willing to have it. They're not willing to have it. They're just only willing to mention me, try and defame my character, and I'll never defend my character. I'll only ever defend what it is I believe in. They can call me all sorts of things, but like I said, the one thing I won't let them call me is a heretic. And that's what we should all have on our minds as Orthodox Christians. That people can say things falsely against you. Everyone knows the whole mess on Twitter. I didn't even address it once, like on my account or anything. I didn't tweet about it. All the racist things he said, I never defended myself. I know all I have to do is defend my position, and I stand justified. And this is what we see. This is their 4th stream. Nothing has happened so far except Agen this, Agen that, Agen young, Agen dumb, Agen, etc. So hopefully, by God's grace, something actually substantial happens. So far, I think this is substantial for our side. People are learning from these streams. It gives me the time and the place to sit with my brothers and discuss this theology. And I love sharing this with you guys. So glory to God on that account. Brothers, any last thing you guys want to add?
Before we wrap up real quick, if anybody has anything that they want us to cover, maybe from the rest of the stream or anything, please put it in the chat and we'll cover it real quick before we leave. But yeah, I think it's funny that Kai is now siding with the Muslims. You know, for a guy who built his whole platform on going against them. Now he's trying to vindicate them. Which, by the way, the whole debate is up on Agen's channel. The one with Dean Responds. It was a very good debate. Agen obviously cooked because, I mean, God Logic watched it, and God Logic thinks it's good. And I don't know about you guys. I value God Logic's opinion far more than Kai's. You know, I think he's actually somebody that would be a good speaker on this topic. But you know, regardless, they think we did bad. Whatever. I would like to see Kai maybe take a debate with any of them. I've never seen Kai debate anyone, actually, for that matter. And here he is saying, I would destroy you in debate. Well, do you even have debate experience? Have you had a debate so far? But whatever. Again, you're asking for something that's very, very unreasonable. Just say something very simple. Offer the debate. We're offering the debate. 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 1 versus 3, whatever you want. But simply put, just have a normal debate. It can be moderated. You can pick the moderator. You can pick the platform. But just let's be realistic. Let's be simple. There's no need to overcomplicate it unless you actually don't want it and you're just looking for an excuse.
At the end of the day, I like the way it is this way, even though I'm willing to debate. I like it this way where you're not doing anything but complaining because your own side is saying you guys are afraid. I see this all throughout your comments. I've even seen you delete comments on your own posts from people from your own side. But yeah, enough of that. Big shout out to Kairos for coming here. His channel is Alexandrian Theology. This is his account. I have it pinned right here. That's his name. iKan, he doesn't have a channel, but he typically appears with me. So big thank you to iKan. And yeah, hopefully something productive comes from this. Hopefully this helps the right people. And yeah, as always, guys, God bless.